The Union is going from strength to strength, and we're committed to further strengthening and safeguarding the Union through the implementation of the Windsor Framework and our delivery of the Safeguarding the Union commitments. Northern Ireland has the best of both worlds now when it has a stable Northern Ireland executive backed by the support and strength of the UK government. And Northern Ireland's peaceful place in the UK is secured by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the principle of consent set within it. I regularly speak to my Cabinet colleagues about their and their department's role in safeguarding Northern Ireland's interest in the Union.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I voted for the Windsor Framework because the Prime Minister said it removed the Irish Sea border, yet £192 million is budgeted to be spent on installing border posts for this non-existent Irish border. So could the Secretary of State please advise the House of the number of checks on people and goods travelling through Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Has these checks increased or decreased since the introduction of the Windsor Framework?
Great question. Secretary of State.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? And it really does depend on whether. So even in the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, there was provision for a red lane for those goods that were going into Northern Ireland that might well flow into the Republic of Ireland itself. And it does rather depend on whether these numbers the honourable gentleman looked at is checks in the red lane or the green lane, or hopefully in the now through the new internal market scheme. The numbers actually rise and fall dependent on a whole host of factors, and as trade increases, as it is doing so, so will the number of checks as a whole, but they will go down as a percentage because the checks will be on goods going through most of the red lane. Now, we will soon get to the point promised in the command paper where we ensure there will be no checks when goods move within the United Kingdom internal market system, save those conducted by UK authorities as part of a risk-based or intelligence-led approach to tackle criminality, abuse of the scheme, smuggling or disease risks. And this will ensure the smooth flow of goods that are moving within the UK internal market.
Right. Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Battling.
Mr Speaker, a vital part of securing Northern Ireland's place in the Union is the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is about levelling up and making sure Northern Ireland has its fair share. Funding is due to end next year in March 2025. What clarification can he give to community, voluntary and other groups that need to plan ahead and face a cliff edge of funding if they do not have those assurances soon?
Can I thank my right honourable friend, the chairman of the Select Committee? I'm wary of giving too many assurances in this space because that is beyond the time of the next general election. There will be a new Conservative government which will have its own, which will have priorities that it wish to update. But we do know that the success of the Shared Prosperity Fund has had in Northern Ireland, and I would like to see, I would like to think, and indeed I've visited projects which has funded, I would like to think it would continue strongly across the next spending review period.
Gavin Robinson.
Very much, Mr Speaker. On behalf of my colleagues, can I extend our deepest sympathies to the family of Frank Field. We shared 4 years in this House together, and I always found him to be a very warm and engaging colleague, somebody who would have time for young parliamentarians like myself and somebody who believed very much in this place and our country. Can I also thank the Secretary of State and the Minister responsible for the inclusion of Northern Ireland into the Horizon Scandal Bill. I think that is incredibly important. Mr Speaker, I, as a unionist, believe in this country and will work every day to strengthen our place within it. We recognise the Safeguarding the Union document as an important stepping stone in maintaining and securing our position. The Secretary of State has mentioned the commitment of government to eliminate all checks, routine checks within the UK internal market system, and we look forward to his faithful delivery of that. We have seen the creation of the East West Council, and yet we have heard little of the Intertrade UK construction and the establishment of the Independent Monitoring Panel. Could I ask the Secretary of State to update the House on those issues?
Can I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question? And I can assure, and I look forward to working with him in his new role, and I can assure him that His Majesty's Government are working at pace and will deliver on our command paper commitments in full, including on the commitments we made on checks. in that command paper. He asked about a whole range of different bodies and pledges we made. On the East-West Council, just last month, we had the inaugural meeting of the East-West Council. The meeting did provide an opportunity for ministers from the United Kingdom Government and Northern Ireland's Executive to come together to discuss the main priorities of the Council's work programme, and we're committed to strengthening and safeguarding the Union through our implementation of that. We're committed to safeguarding the UK internal market by establishing new bodies such as Intertrade UK, which will promote and facilitate trade within the United Kingdom, and I will answer other points when time allows.
Gavin Robinson.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker, for that. He will recognise that one of the issues absent from the Windsor framework and subsequent agreements was the conclusion of an arrangement for veterinary medicines. And he will know how important agriculture is to the Northern Ireland economy, and that Northern Ireland produces 10 times the food that we need to the benefit of our nearest neighbours. The establishment of the Veterinary Medicines Working Group with the Minister of State and my honourable colleague from North Antrim has been incredibly positive, but there is a cliff edge toward the end of next year. So we need to see a successful conclusion to that issue, and I'd be grateful that he could inform the House that that will be the case.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, because this is actually a very, very important matter to both the government and for Northern Ireland. The government's priority is to secure a long-term sustainable solution on veterinary medicines, and to that end we wish to pursue such a solution through discussions with the European Union, as well as preparing for safeguards in all scenarios. We set up, as he said, a Veterinary Medicines Working Group to advise the government on solutions, and are grateful to the expertise of members of this House who are joining that group. And the working group has met twice and aims to report in a timely manner in June. And in the meantime, we have put in place a grace period arrangement until the end of 2025, which supports continuity of supply in Northern Ireland. But he's right to emphasise the importance of this point, and we're working hard on it.
Andrew Salou.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government is committed to the long-term economic growth of Northern Ireland and is working closely with the Executive and business to demonstrate what a fantastic place that Northern Ireland is to live, to work and invest. Some of the things we've done have included the Northern Ireland Investment Summit. We're committed to levelling up Northern Ireland's economy with £617 million spent on 4 city and growth deals. We're implementing key deliverables, of course, in the Safeguarding the Union command paper, and we continue to promote Northern Ireland's unique institutional arrangements.
Andrew Salou.
With the Executive now restored and enjoying a financial package of over £3 billion, does the Minister agree that Northern Ireland businesses are now positioned for an era of transformational success?
Absolutely right, and I agree. I'm grateful to him for highlighting this position. But of course, funding is only one part of the solution. It's vital to have transformation of public services, and there's going to need to be innovative strategic thinking to that end, as well as some revenue raising. The government absolutely stands ready to assist the Northern Ireland Executive with formal structures to help them towards those ends. I'm grateful to him.
The Minister of State for his answer. We have a massively skilled workforce in Northern Ireland, as everyone here knows, and I know the Minister knows. But in order to increase investment, Mr. Speaker, we must create more skilled jobs and employ more people within that sector. So what discussions has the Minister of State had with Cabinet colleagues to secure more jobs in our aerospace community in Northern Ireland? We can do more, we just need a bit more help. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to him, and I've visited Spirit Aerosystems as well as other related companies, and there's a terrific pool of talent and skill there in Northern Ireland. We work with DBT to ensure that the same advantages are available to people and businesses in Northern Ireland as across the rest of the UK. I sense that brevity requires I not elaborate DBT's full offer, but it is certainly there, and if he wishes, I can certainly write to him and set out the detail. I will write to him and set out the detail of DBT.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, the UK Government regularly engages with the recently restored Northern Ireland Executive on a range of issues, and we will continue to work together for the benefit of Northern Ireland. Only yesterday I met with Minister Muir, who is responsible for agriculture, environment and rural affairs, to discuss the implications of the Windsor framework and to work through how I can help him to succeed across his full spectrum of responsibilities.
Arthur?
I thank the Minister for that positive response. He will be aware of the ecological disaster that is Lough Neagh, which supplies 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water, and that's partly caused by the runoff of agricultural fertiliser, climate change and the spread of the invasive zebra mussel species, but it's also been exacerbated by sewage dumping. So can you say a bit more, because in the past I've found that this department and DEFRA here have not been willing to work with Stormont in addressing some of these environmental issues in Northern Ireland, and what can he do to address these?
I'm very grateful to her, and yes, I've stood on the shores of Lough Neagh, very conscious of the condition of that body of water. It is, of course, an enormous body of water and very beautiful. But the reality is that the responsibility for it is devolved. We haven't had an executive for a period. We're absolutely delighted that it is both back and that being conducted and carried forward in a very constructive spirit. I will continue, as I say, to work with Minister Muir. I don't want to tread on his toes, but we will put ourselves at his disposal to offer whatever help we reasonably can. But I know that he's a minister of great dedication and energy, and I will look forward to him succeeding on this urgent matter.
Mr. Oliver Hill.
Yeah, right, honourable friend, agree with me that Frank Field left an immense legacy in the field of pensions, starting off as chairman of the APPG on the Maxwell pensioners problem, an inspired Minister of State, and subsequently involved in all the great debates we've had on pensions, and we'll miss him. As regards nature-based solutions to climate change, what impact do you think they could have on the sort of problems we've been discussing in the context of Northern Ireland?
Well, I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend, and I will agree with him on the pensions point. When it comes to nature-based solutions, I would love to have that conversation with him. Perhaps we might do it in the tea room. But again, I would just observe it's not my specialist area of expertise, and I'm very confident that Minister Muir would be interested to know his ideas. If he wishes to share them with me, I'll gladly pass them on.
Alexander Stafford.
Number 4, please.
Secretary.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 4 and 12 together. I'm sure my honourable friends will welcome the fact that Northern Ireland is once again has local politicians taking decisions in a local assembly accountable to local people. With a funding package worth over £3 billion, the Executive is taking forward the vital work of public service transformation and delivering sustainable finances, ensuring better outcomes for the day-to-day lives of the people of Northern Ireland. And the impact of all this so far has been unbelievably positive.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The commitment this government, and of course my right honourable friend, has shown in pushing for the restoration of Northern Ireland Executive is clearly demonstrated in the £3.3 billion announced to transform public services there. But what help is the Home Office Civil Service providing to their colleagues in Northern Ireland to further make sure the people of Northern Ireland have a modern, efficient public services they deserve, and how will this benefit all 4 nations?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question and agree with him, actually. There's now a fantastic opportunity, and we're trying to take it, for the UK government to collaborate with and support the Northern Ireland Executive to transform public services. The UK government has high hopes that ministers in the Executive will move quickly to deliver on their commitments to set up a transformation board, and the government is excited to work with Northern Ireland ministers to produce plans that will deliver that transformation for Northern Ireland. Indeed, I met with the First and Deputy First Ministers last week, where we talked about this work and how we can further it in the very short term.
Luke Evans.
Building on the Secretary of State's answer, isn't the return, does he agree with me, the return and the restoration of the Northern Ireland Assembly now provides the stability for further private investment into Northern Ireland? This is a massive opportunity and the missing link in the puzzle that could make a huge difference. How does he intend to capitalise upon this?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Not only does the restoration of devolved government provide certainty and stability for business, but it allows us to harness our combined energies and expertise to make Northern Ireland a fantastic place to live, work and invest. My honourable friend, the Minister of State, reminded the House of the success of the Northern Ireland Investment Summit last September, which welcomed 180 business investors from around the world, and of our £617 million investment in Northern Ireland's 4 city and growth deals. And recently I visited Washington, D.C., where with both the First and Deputy First Ministers present. And it's fair to say, Mr. Speaker, that the US business community is now well aware of the amazing opportunities that now exist in Northern Ireland and are looking at them hungrily.
Gregory Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, the return of devolution has to be built upon, particularly when there are still some issues to be resolved. While some in Northern Ireland concentrate on complaining about the outstanding problems, there are those of us committed to resolving them. The Secretary of State is in a better position than most to help resolve them. Will he recommit today that in the coming weeks we will see further moves in the direction of resolving all the outstanding issues?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and also congratulate him on his recent honour for his many, many years of public service, elected service in this place and to his constituents. Yes, he absolutely can have that commitment for me. I am committed to delivering all the pledges we made in the command paper at great pace, and I'm absolutely committed to delivering the best outcomes for everyone across Northern Ireland, because that is what Northern Ireland deserves.
Sir George Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the restoration of devolved government in Northern Ireland is very welcome. The Minister will be aware that polling evidence since the Good Friday Agreement has shown that the big growth area in how people identify themselves is that a growing number of people identify as being Northern Irish, as distinct from Irish or British. What implications does he think that has on the way devolved government conducts itself going forward?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, because it's a genuinely interesting point, the growth in the number of people who do declare themselves, who live in Northern Ireland, who declare themselves to be Northern Irish. And I'd like to think it reflects itself in the way that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister are now go about conducting their business. They are working together as in a respectful and positive way, respectful of each other's communities and wanting the best for the place they represent. And I do believe this signifies a healthy development for the future of Northern Ireland politics.
Chair Secretary of State Hilary Benn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your eloquent tribute to Frank Field. He was a brave and a generous man. And can I say to the Right Honourable Member for Belfast East that we look forward to working with him in his new position. The UK's successful bid to host with Ireland the 2028 Euros is a fantastic opportunity for Northern Ireland, but with just 3 years left to build the Casement Park Stadium, the Executive has yet to invite tenders. In May last year, the Secretary of State was asked who would provide the money, and he replied, "All partners, I guarantee it." Given the clock is now ticking, how and well does the Right Honourable Gentleman intend, with others, to honour that guarantee so the stadium gets built on time?
Secretary of State.
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. He knows that he's asking the question of a football referee for the last 43 years and someone who's rather passionate about the game. And I really do want to see these Euro games played at Casement Park. I made clear that I would like to see Euro 2028 games take part in Casement Park. However, the latest costs that I've seen are significantly higher than the ones they were a year ago. And any taxpayer contribution to the Casement Park project will need to be made on a value-for-money basis. And I've said also many times there is no blank cheque here, especially when there is no contractor appointed yet. You do not want to artificially inflate a price. And the Northern Ireland Executive will also need to decide on whether and how it will underwrite any future increases in costs. So we are all partners, as I said back then, are working together to try and work out what the number is and how we can deliver on it.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for that reply. One of the other challenges the institutions are facing is dealing with the continuing legacy of the Troubles. And 7 days from now, all civil cases and inquests related to the Troubles will come to an end under the Legacy Act, which is widely opposed in Northern Ireland. Does the Right Honourable Gentleman think that confidence in the new independent commission will be helped or hindered by the fact that he has recently brought 3 separate legal challenges to the disclosure by coroners of information to families about what actually happened to their loved ones, information which they have been denied for so many years?
I believe that actually the honourable gentleman there is conflating 2 issues. One is ongoing elements of how we deal with PII and the neither confirm nor deny policy in court cases in Northern Ireland and indeed across the United Kingdom. And secondly, what the new commission we're setting up to deal with legacy has to do. And I actually do believe that those who have even civil cases now will be able to use the ICRIR when it opens its doors on the 1st of May in good faith. Indeed, only this month, the former co-chair of the consultative group on the past, Dennis Bradley, stated that he thought and I quote, the people involved around the ICRR are very good people, and I have a lot of regard for them. And if people decide it offers them something, then, I'd be very reluctant to make too many strong judgments around it. Because, and this is the problem we are trying to solve as the UK government, and I quote him directly, we have created a swamp around legacy, a complete swamp, and anything that helps some people to get out of that swamp, I won't be too critical.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I add a tribute from my own party to Frank Field and send our condolences to his friends and family. In 40 years as an MP for Birkenhead, he was a very faithful servant not only to his constituents but also to this place. Right across the House, the return of devolved government to Northern Ireland has been rightly welcomed. Could I ask the Secretary of State to reaffirm his government's commitment to the principle of consent, not just in Northern Ireland, but also in Scotland and in Wales, that the peoples of these places should be able to choose the form of government best suited to their needs, whether that happens to be inside or outside of the United Kingdom?
Secretary of State.
Well, I very much welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman's welcoming of restored institutions. I'm also a great respecter of results of referenda. I believe in Scotland we've had one, and that's probably enough said.
Jones.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the government remains committed to supporting integrated education in Northern Ireland and has already made available funds to support more schools than ever to convert to integrated status. I and my noble friend Lord Kane look forward to engaging with the new Education Minister, Paul Given, to make progress on this important issue.
Sarah Jones.
2 weeks ago, I travelled with colleagues to Northern Ireland and we visited Forge Integrated Primary School and met lots of very fine children. In 2015, £150 million of Fresh Start funding was earmarked for integrated education in Northern Ireland. So what does the Minister say to those schools who were expecting this funding but have found it's no longer guaranteed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the House may not know that in Northern Ireland only 7% of school children, 7% can be said to be attending an integrated school, and that is something which we would like to see change. On her particular point, I think it has to be said that the period over which Fresh Start funding was released would have ended at the end of March next year. So what we've done is repurpose £150 million of that funding to provide additional flexibility to the Northern Ireland Executive in respect to that funding stream and schools. We are determined to see more parents given the opportunity to choose integrated education for their children as a vital part of the process of reconciliation, and I for one am especially committed to it as somebody who proudly attends a Baptist church where for many years I worshipped with a Roman Catholic lady and had no idea. We should help Northern Ireland move to the point that denomination is a small matter and people move forward together.
An important item in the in tray of the newly reformed executive is early years education and childcare. Thanks to the actions of this government, we now have more generous entitlement to free childcare in England and Northern Ireland. Will you discuss with the executive how Northern Ireland might be levelled up on childcare, including, for example, using revenue-raising measures?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this, and I'm very grateful to her for putting it on the agenda. Certainly we will engage with the executive on this point, and she is, of course, absolutely right to mention revenue raising. It is a fact that the executive needs to both transform public services and improve revenue raising so that everything there can be on a sustainable basis.
Mr. Blair Anderson.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also recently visited the Forge Integrated Primary School in Belfast, and I saw their many much needed and developed plans to replace their porta cabins with buildings to answer for the need, an extra need for integrated schools. They're very disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that this has been shelved along with projects in 9 other integrated schools. Education is devolved, but this was earmarked UK government money agreed under the 2015 Fresh Start Agreement. Does the Secretary of State understand why teachers, pupils and parents are so disappointed that those plans have been shelved, and does he have any plans to restore them? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do hear the honourable lady, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I do, of course, understand people's concerns, and we too have visited schools. I certainly have. I think my right honourable friend has. But I would repeat again that what we've done is repurpose the money so that it could endure and be available to the executive to be used for purposes as they decide. If we'd not repurposed it, the money would have expired at the end of March next year. So actually I'm proud that we've taken the steps necessary with the Treasury to enable this money to continue to be available to the executive. But it is for them to decide how to spend it, but we do continue to be fully committed to integrated education.
The Northern Irish Public's relief at the restoration of the Assembly 6.
I've met with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister last week, where we had a constructive discussion about the Executive's priorities.
Public's relief at the restoration of the Assembly has given way to frustration at the lack of pace of delivery by the Executive. After a 2-year void, they are saying they don't want to be hurried to deliver for Northern Ireland. Health care staff who are oppressed, people waiting for special educational needs, and people watching Lough Neagh face into another summer of algae bloom are very much in a hurry for action. Northern Ireland urgently needs a delivery plan, it needs a programme for government, and it needs a budget. Yes, resources are part of that. Can the Minister update on any negotiations on the fiscal framework, and will he impress on the Executive the need for urgent action and not just warm words?
Secretary of State.
The one thing I did pick up from the First Minister and Deputy First Minister last week is they too want to act in all the ways that the honourable lady said, and their priorities include developing a programme for government which will enable them to take forward the vital work of public service transformation. They're only 12 weeks in, and I do look forward to good results in the short, medium and long term.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I wish to welcome our special guest who is observing our proceedings today, His Excellency Joria and Abdullah, Speaker of the House of Representatives of Malaya. Your Excellency, you are most welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Jonathan Gillis.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have been asked to reply. I know that members across the House will wish to join me in offering condolences to the family and friends of Lord Frank Field. He was an outstanding parliamentarian who worked tirelessly to make society a better place. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in Berlin. He has announced the biggest strengthening of our defence in a generation. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that members will also want to join me in wishing the Jewish community a happy Passover, a celebration of freedom. But of course, we remember the empty chairs of those hostages still being held captive in Gaza and call for their immediate release. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jonathan Gillis.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to pass on my thoughts and prayers to Lord Field's family, friends and colleagues, and particularly the students and teachers at the Birches Head Academy in Stoke-on-Trent who are part of the Frank Field Education Trust. Mr. Speaker, since being elected in 2019, I've helped reopen Tunstall Town Hall with a new library and family hub, secured funding for additional CCTV, a new alley gate and better lighting in Tunstall to make sure our streets are safe, breathing new life as well into Tunstall's old library in Bath thanks to this government's levelling up fund of £56 million to Stoke-on-Trent. But sadly, Labour-led Stoke-on-Trent City Council seek to undermine this progress by introducing a brand new garden tax on residents to have their garden waste collected refuse to take planning enforcement against rogue and absent landlords who plague Tunstall High Street, and are increasing crime and antisocial behaviour by dumping undesirable people in the centre of Tunstall at Sneed Arms Hotel. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that Stoke-on-Trent Labour...
Order. It's normally Mr Gullis who's loud, so please, let me hear it.
It just goes to show the disdain the Labour Party have for Stoke-on-Trent. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me? It's time for Stoke-on-Trent Labour to axe the garden tax, to take the fight to lousy landlords and...
Order. There is a question to be asked, and there is a time in which we ask it. I suggest he puts in for an adjournment debate. I'm sure you've got the answer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's not much I can add to that. He has ever proved what an excellent campaigner he is for his constituents. And of course, he highlights the same problems with Labour councils across the country, raising taxes and letting services fall into disrepair. And of course, he's totally right to be holding rogue landlords to account.
Right, we now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first of all share with the Deputy Prime Minister's comments regarding our Jewish community and a happy Passover, and also start by acknowledging the loss of David Markand and Baroness Massey, both of whom made historic contributions in this Parliament, politics and wider life. And also send my condolences following today's news to the family of Lord Frank Field, who is a good friend of mine and a colleague, and who was a tireless campaigner against poverty and a champion for his constituents. Mr. Speaker, I know the party opposite is desperate to talk about my living arrangements, but the public want to know what this government is going to do about theirs. Natalie from Brighton has been served with 2 no-fault eviction notices in 18 months. She joins nearly 1 million families at risk of homelessness due to his party's failure to ban this cruel practice. Now, instead of obsessing over my house, when will he get a grip and show the same obsession with ending no-fault evictions?
Well, to begin with, it is a pleasure to have another exchange with the Right Honourable Lady in this House, our 5th in 12 months. Any more of these, and she'll be claiming it as her principal residence. On the issue of no-fault evictions, it may have escaped the Right Honourable Lady's attention, but we will be voting on exactly that matter later today. The Conservative government taking action.
Mr. Speaker, he clearly thought he could spend all week obsessing over my living arrangements. I didn't even bother to read up on his own government's bill this afternoon. The reality is, he caved in to vested interests on his backbenchers and delayed justice for people like Natalie. Yes. This week, the Housing Minister said there is no solid date for banning no-fault evictions. The Housing Secretary now says it won't happen before an election. So if he can give us a date, can he name it now?
I can name the date for the Right Honourable Lady. Today. It's today that this House will be voting on it, and I'm confident that in line with our manifesto, we will deliver on that commitment.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, he clearly hasn't been looking up on his own government bills. But let me turn to another Tory housing failure. Leaseholds are a rip-off and a con. But the government's proposed ban on new leaseholds applies only to houses. The majority of leaseholds are in flats. What's the point on a ban on new leaseholds if it won't apply to flats?
Again, the Right Honourable Lady is talking about legislation introduced by this government, which the party opposite totally failed to introduce in their entire time in office. And it's no surprise. Because it's this government which has brought social housing waiting lists down by nearly 500,000 and delivered more affordable homes in the last year and the last 12 years than Labour delivered when they were in office. But of course, all of this can only be paid for by making sure that we have a strong economy. And I'll tell you, her policy to repeal every single Conservative trade union law in the first 100 days would open the door to French-style wildcat strikes, sweeping away the reforms that made this country great. And we all know, though, Mr. Speaker, the one reform that the Right Honourable Lady would not abolish from Margaret Thatcher, the right to buy your council house.
Councillor Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, I was expecting a little bit better from him today. He seems to be a bit worn out. Maybe it's the 3 a.m. calls from the bad men that have been keeping him up at night. But he also, Mr. Speaker, he also talks about strikes and the unions. We've had more strikes under this government's watch than any time before. And once again, he hasn't read his own bill. Their ban on leasehold won't apply to the majority of people. It's like banning non-doms but exempting Tory prime ministers. And he speaks about affordable homes. Families are trapped in temporary accommodation and stuck on waiting lists. And in the West Midlands, his mayor has used his multi-million-pound housing budget to build just 46 social homes in 8 years. That's almost as many as the Chancellor's property portfolio. But the British people know that his party won't build the homes that this country needs. So when are they going to get a chance to vote for a government that will?
Well, I'm surprised the Right Honourable Lady raises the West Midlands when Labour-controlled Birmingham have virtually bankrupted the council, are hiking up council tax by 21%, whilst in the meantime, and I'm sure this would please her, continuing to hand out 1.8 million to the trade unions. By contrast, Andy Street, our brilliant mayor of the wider West Midlands, has delivered £6.1 billion of investment to improve transport. So there you have it, the contrast between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. The usual political opportunism from her, failing to ask about the issues that really matter. If you want more bins, if you want more bin collections, more potholes filled, lower debt and lower council tax, vote Conservative, because whether it's Ben Houchin in the Tees Valley or whether it's Andy Street in the West Midlands, it's only the Conservative mayors who deliver more for less.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's pretty revealing that he thinks that housing isn't an issue for the British people, because I think it really is. And people in glass houses shouldn't throw the stones, because in Birmingham and across the whole of this country, councils are facing black holes because of his government's austerity programme. And I would also warn the Deputy Prime Minister that Tory councils have also faced 114 notices, and Birmingham Council has had over £1 billion taken from their budget from some of the poorest people. More than 16,000 families face losing their homes after the party's mini-budget, Mr. Speaker, and mortgage bills continue to soar. Meanwhile, the former Prime Minister parades around the world in a twisted victory lap promoting a new book, saying that the mini-budget was her proudest moment. So since she won't apologise to those families losing their home, will he?
Well, what the Prime Minister has done since he has taken office with the Chancellor is to restore stability to our economy, inflation halved and more down to 3%. And as a result of that, in an increasingly dangerous world, the Prime Minister was able to announce his plan for the biggest strengthening of defence spending in a generation. But it should come as no surprise that the party opposite refused to say whether they back it or not, because this comes from the Right Honourable Lady who voted to scrap Trident and install in Downing Street someone who wanted to change the army into a Peace Corps. There you have it.
Mr. Speaker, friends, we all want to see 2.5%. The difference is that we haven't cut the army to its smallest size since Napoleon. And Mr. Speaker, never mind some secretive deep state. Never mind some secretive deep state. It's the state of the Tory party that's the problem. They're in a deep state of sewerage. After 14 years, they failed renters, they failed leaseholders, and they failed mortgage holders. But, Mr. Speaker, I read with interest that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been urging his neighbour in Number 10 to call an election because he's worried they might get wiped out. Has he finally realised that when he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back to get his mate into Number 10, he was ditching their biggest election winner for a pint-sized loser?
Well, I think the whole House will have heard, despite all the bluster from the lady opposite, not a single word on whether she would actually back our plans to invest in our armed forces. No plans in a dangerous world. And of course, as ever, the Deputy Leader is always looking to attack others' failures, but never the one to take responsibility for her own. She once said, "You shouldn't be waiting for the police to bang on your door. If you did it, then you shouldn't be doing your job." The Right Honourable Landlady should forget her tax advice and follow her own advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And levelling up, like my friend earlier, in the Calder Valley is absolutely on fire. 196.5 million for hospital reconfiguration, 150 million for flood defences, no fewer than 11 schools being remodelled or rebuilt as we speak. 45 million for 3 town centre regeneration, and Elland is getting a new railway station as well. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that the naysayers around about levelling up need look no further than the Calder Valley to see what a great achievement this government is doing?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's not just the Colne Valley, but it's communities up and down the country. The government is investing billions in infrastructure across the United Kingdom, creating jobs and opportunities in every region. And I know that my honourable friend has been a staunch advocate for the Calder Valley, which is a fantastic example of that in action.
It's Leader of the SNP, Murray Black.
May I join in wishing the Jewish community a happy Passover and also in sending my condolences to the families of family and loved ones of Frank Field. 2 years ago, when mass graves were discovered in Ukraine, this House united in condemnation and rightly treated these graves as evidence of war crimes which Russia must be made to answer for. Yesterday, Palestinian officials uncovered 2 mass graves outside the bombed hospitals in Gaza. These graves also constitute as a war crime, don't they?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, of course, we would expect the democratic government of Israel to investigate any allegations of misconduct, and that's exactly what they do, and it's exactly what the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister urge them to do. But I find it quite extraordinary that she seeks to draw parallels between the legitimate war of self-defence of Israel and the conduct of Russia.
Murray Black.
300 bodies, including the elderly and the injured, some of which had been stripped naked, mutilated, with their hands tied behind their backs. The UK's own arms policy states that if there is even a risk that war crimes may be taking place, then that is reason enough to halt the sale of arms. Given all we know, why then is the Prime Minister yet to do so?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we continue to urge the Israeli government to investigate any allegations of misconduct. The difference, though, is that we can trust the Israeli government, a democratically elected government, to properly investigate those things. And of course, we keep the advice under review. The Foreign Secretary has recently made it clear that he has conducted a determination and has not changed his advice regarding export licences, and I think that is the correct decision.
Colin McCartney.
Speaker, the good people of Lincoln who all declare their taxes and pay tax on their profit when selling their second homes overwhelmingly want Lincoln Christmas Market to be brought back after the Labour-run City Council cruelly closed it last year. The Labour City Councils refused to do what the people of Lincoln want. What message will the Deputy Prime Minister send to the voters of Lincoln before next week's local elections?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm afraid that what the honourable gentleman has described is the Grinch in action. That Christmas market in the home of the Magna Carta was beloved by local residents. They have totally ignored the wishes of local residents and cancelled it, and they should reverse that decision.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Liberal Democrats, may I also offer our condolences to the friends and family of the late Lord Frank Field, and to wish a happy Passover to all those in the Jewish community. Mr. Speaker, unpaid carers have shared heartbreaking stories of how they have been hounded by the DWP and told to pay huge fines for minor infringements on carers' allowance earning rules, all because the government failed to do anything about a problem they have known about for years. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, one of the Prime Minister's own dementia advisers resigned, saying that this government's treatment of those unpaid carers was beyond the pale. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise to all those unpaid carers who have been failed by his government and commit to a full review of the system?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I pay tribute to all those unpaid carers. Indeed, I met some of them over the weekend. I know how hard they work, and they keep our society functioning through their commitment to us. And that's why we've actually uprated the benefits by £81.90 a week and increased the carers allowance by almost £1,500 since 2010. Now, in respect of allegations of overpayment, of course, appropriate discretion should be shown, but if it is the case that there have been erroneous overpayments, it's right on behalf of the taxpayer to be able to recuperate those. But of course, we'll work with anyone who's struggling with those repayments to negotiate sustainable and affordable repayment plans.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, my Ireland constituency of Unismore is accessed via two bridges, the Menai Suspension Bridge and the Britannia Bridge. Holyhead is the second busiest port in the UK, but bridge repairs and the weather can result in long traffic queues. To make the most of our Anglesey Freeport and new nuclear at Wilver, a third crossing is vital. And last year, the Welsh Labour government scrapped plans for all new road projects, including our third bridge. On behalf of my Unismore constituents, will the Deputy Prime Minister use his influence to ensure that North Wales is not ignored by Cardiff and we get that third bridge?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know and understand the frustration across Wales, and particularly in the Honourable Lady's constituency, with this state of affairs. The Welsh Government have not prioritised building new roads. They're damaging growth potential in places like Anglesey. They're spending over £100 million on new politicians. And we will work with the Right Honourable Lady to make sure we resolve this.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative candidate for London Mayor has promoted Islamophobic tropes online,
Shame on her.
endorsed the beliefs of Enoch Powell, and claimed the black community has a problem with crimes. In the week that we marked the 31st anniversary of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, does the Deputy Prime Minister really endorse these views?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady knows that she does not correctly represent the views of the candidate. And I find it extraordinary that she raises the issue of crime, because whilst Labour's London Mayor has increased the precept by over 70%. Actually, recorded crime has increased 20% in London. That is the record of the Labour London Mayor, and no wonder people will be voting against him.
Cheryl Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I note that I'm the chair of the Fisheries APPG and thank the government for the recent pollock catch compensation. On the 12th of May, we will see the first ever National Fishing Remembrance Day. I'll be marking this occasion by laying a wreath at a service being held at Lewes Quayside by the memorial plaque, which has the name of my late husband and unfortunately others on it. Will the Deputy Prime Minister, and will he ask the Prime Minister to mark this occasion by remembering those who have died, bringing this important food source to our table?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know how important this is to the Honourable Lady, and I'm sure she will be remembering her late husband, Neil, on this day. It's important that we all recognise the sacrifices made by fishermen and women to bring food to our table, and I know that my colleague Minister Spencer will be visiting Grimsby on that day.
At Weston.
Mr. Speaker, in today's Northern Echo, Borough Chairman Steve Gibson describes the Mayor of Tees Valley as having given away the future of the region's children. He was referring to the 40% of Tees works with a forecast worth of £500 million gifted by Lord Houchin in a deal to 2 local business mates. Mr. Gibson, who helped establish the Local Development Corporation, describes it as unforgivable. Will the government finally admit Lord Houchin and the Conservatives have sold the Teesside taxpayers down the river?
He talks about Teesside taxpayers. Actually, Ben Houchin has never imposed a mayoral precept in Tees Valley, full stop. And actually, at the same time, he's saved Teesside Airport and secured a new free port for Teesside. No wonder people will be voting for him again.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend if he has seen the video that is doing the rounds of the theft in the shop in my constituency, Station Road, Boots the Chemist. In a space of 8 minutes, 2 threatening individuals robbed thousands of pounds out of that shop. And they're not alone. This is happening again and again and again. In fact, one of my team went out and photographed them leaving, brazenly, not caring and even spitting at the police. Will he now please say to the Home Secretary, through to the police, this is not a petty crime. This is a threat of violence and massive robbery. This should be a priority for the police. What we just talk about always is more police. Surely what we should be asking to be is more effective policing and get them off the streets.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I think my right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this, and often it's the allegedly lower-level crimes are the ones that cause the biggest impact on communities. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has been very clear on that point, and I will make it to him again. Is also why we're rolling out a range of crime prevention measures through the Safer Streets Fund, improving CCTV and street lighting, and we introduced the Police Crime and Sentencing Courts Act, again to give greater powers to the police to deliver tougher sentences for more serious offenders.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier on in the session, the Deputy Prime Minister said that when the Prime Minister and Chancellor took office, they restored stability to the UK economy. Who does he think caused the instability?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I remember. They might want to forget it, but I remember the day the Conservatives came into office in 2010, and what was the note left on the desk of the Chief Secretary? There is no money left. That is the challenge that we have addressed through the Prime Minister and Chancellor successively.
Wendy Morland.
Mr. Speaker, Labour's mayoral
mayoral candidate in the West Midlands talks about housing but makes no commitment to protect our precious Greenbelt. He talks about transport, but he fails to commit to reopening Aldridge train station. And he committed to saving police stations such as Aldridge. Then when the Labour PCC said he would close them, he changed his mind and agreed to that. So we are left wondering, in my constituency, what does he stand for? So does my right honourable friend agree with me that only Mayor Andy Street has a plan and a track record to be trusted to deliver for the West Midlands?
Well, as ever, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct to highlight the record of Labour's Police and Crime Commissioner, and West Midlands Police have actually been put in special measures on Simon Foster's watch. And when it comes to the Greenbelt, we've all seen the new wheeze from the Labour Party, redesignate Greenbelt, Greybelt and concrete all over it. Well, the Conservatives will not allow that to happen, and people up and down the country will vote Conservative to stop that happening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservative ministers like to blame strikes and the pandemic for the appalling waiting times in the NHS. The Blackpool Teaching Hospitals Trust hasn't hit its target for seeing patients in A&E within 4 hours since 2015. Before the strikes, before the pandemic, but 5 years after the Conservatives came to office. So who does the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, blame for that?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, the party opposite like to pretend the pandemic didn't happen, and they like... That is the cause of the biggest pressure on the NHS, and they complain about NHS performance whilst backing strikes by doctors who unreasonably want a 35% pay rise. And despite all of those pressures, actually, A&E performance has improved in the past month.
Mr. Speaker, the Labour leader of the almost bankrupt Hastings Borough Council and several other Labour councillors resigned from the Labour Party, citing that the National Labour Party has become overly authoritarian, a dereliction of local democracy, has lost its moral compass and is suffocating local voices because its only objective is power for power's sake. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree that voting for Conservative candidates in upcoming elections will ensure local voices are heard and local democracy is upheld and better services are delivered?
Deputy Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the really serious concerns about Labour councillors in Hastings. And this is what one former Labour councillor said. Labour are no longer providing the policies, support or focus on local government. I couldn't have put it better myself.
Mary Glendon.
Speaker, with thousands of steelworkers' jobs on the line, the likelihood of industrial action and reports of a deal for India to be exempt from carbon taxes, will this government now back this detailed, serious and robust multi-union proposal as the only way to keep primary steel making in the UK?
The government will engage with any proposals that have been brought forward, as we always do, but it is actually the case that we've already provided over £700 million in energy cost relief to the steel sector in the past 10 years, and it's also the case that even the past year, the government spent £97 million more on UK-made steel for major public projects. So we're continuing to work with the steel industry, but we've already provided tremendous support.
John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I very much associate myself with the remarks of my right honourable friend regarding Lord Frank Field. He was a good man. I very much welcome the government's firm commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% by 2030, something that will send the right message to our allies and potential adversaries alike. And it's something that the 1922 Defence Committee has been campaigning for a little while. Would my right honourable friend do what he can to ensure, though, that some of that increased money is spent on additional recruitment, including, if necessary, increasing wages sufficiently, to ensure that the Navy can manage ships, the Air Force can maintain its aircraft, and the Army can dominate ground?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know what a staunch advocate my honourable friend is for the armed forces and for funding the armed forces. And I think it's something that all of us can take great pride in, that we are putting the resources in now to meet the challenges that the nation is likely to face over the next 5 years. We'll be working through the allocation of that, but it is already the case that in January we had the largest ever number of applications in recent years to join the armed forces. So we're making progress on that.
John Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Lisa cares for her mother. She works part-time at WH Smith's and so was sure to keep the DWP informed so that she wouldn't be overpaid carers allowance. But because of a DWP blunder, she now faces a bill for £4,000.
Wow, shame.
The Secretary of State for Science cares for her career. She works part-time as a woke detector. But when she blundered, calling a top scientist a Hamas supporter,
Can you imagine?
the bill, tens of thousands of pounds in costs and damages, was picked up by taxpayers.
Wow.
Like Lisa. Why?
The Prime Minister.
Well, it's this government has uprated benefits for carers, almost £1,500 more. Of course, I think it is the case that her constituents and my constituents, people up and down the country, would expect the government to seek to recover overpaid sums. But of course, we need to do that in a compassionate way, and if people are struggling to make repayments, I know that the DWP will engage to make sure that they have a sustainable and affordable way to make those repayments.
Robin Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the tributes and condolences paid to the late great Frank Field? One of his lasting achievements in the world of education is the holiday activities and food fund, something that this government can take great pride in having funded. Can I urge my right honourable friend to use his good offices across government to make sure we secure a multi-year settlement for the continuance of that vital work?
The Prime Minister.
Yes, well, I know what an important piece of work this is, and his commitment to campaigning for it. We've already provided substantial sums for it, and I'm sure we will continue to do so.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the chair of the Scottish arm of Feeding Britain, can I thank you and the front benches for their tributes to the great Frank Field. He chaired an all-party parliamentary inquiry 10 years ago on food poverty, and food bank use has increased relentlessly since then. So can I ask the government to consider, in Frank Field's memory, a cross-sector summit with the aim of helping communities to secure the resources to deliver food security programmes at the scale that is necessary?
Well, I join him in paying tribute to Lord Frank Field's campaigning. It is actually the case that over the past couple of years we've provided over £108 billion worth of support with the cost of living, including extra cost of living payments of £900 last year. The effect of all of that is actually there are 1.1 million fewer people living in absolute poverty than when the Conservatives came to office.
Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we had the Finance Bill, and in it I noticed a reduction in the capital gains tax from 28% to 24% on residential properties to try and turbo boost the residential market. So will this apply retrospectively? So hypothetically, if you're a Labour frontbencher who could owe capital gains tax, will you benefit from this Conservative tax cut?
Well, I've always believed in having lower taxes that everyone pays.
Final question, Kate Osborne.
Mr. Speaker, this week marks the 5th Lesbian Visibility Week, founded by my good friend, publisher of Diva magazine, Linda Riley. This comes at a time when LGBTQIA women are being let down by this government, and nowhere more so than by their failure to remove the financial burdens that same-sex couples face when accessing IVF. My constituents, Holly and Leanne, like so many others, have been priced out of having a family. So will the Deputy Prime Minister commit to finally ending this gay tax for same-sex couples who want to start a family?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would dispute the Honourable Lady's characterisation of this government's record in this area. It was actually this government that introduced marriage for same-sex couples and passed the Turing Law. Now, she raises an important point, which I'm happy to take up with the Health Secretary, but the overall record of this government is an excellent one.
That completes Deputy Prime Minister's question. Right, we now come to the statement to call the Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to update the House on the government's commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% this decade. In January, in my speech to Lancaster House, I warned that we're entering a much more dangerous period, a much more dangerous world, and I made the case for a national conversation about defence spending. Since then, Putin has stepped up his attacks on Ukraine. China is increasingly assertive. Tensions have escalated in the Middle East, culminating in Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel 10 days ago, conducted in parallel with the proxies that Iran has nourished around Israel's border and the Middle East, including, of course, the Houthis, who continue to hold global trade hostage in the Red Sea. Mr. Speaker, since January, the world has become even more dangerous, not less, and we continue to ask more of our courageous and professional armed forces. Our sailors have served under the constant risk of attack in the Red Sea, helping to protect international shipping and our own cost of living. We bolstered our Royal Air Force presence in the Middle East, enabling Typhoon crews to intercept Iranian drones and missiles recently fired towards Israel. And around 20,000 of our personnel from all three of our services, with a huge inventory of naval, air and land assets, have been active around Europe as part of the largest NATO training exercise since the Cold War. In short, Mr. Speaker, we increasingly need our armed forces, and we increasingly are asking more of them. So yesterday, the Prime Minister committed to hit the 2.5% of GDP for defence by 2030. It means we'll invest an additional £75 billion into defence over the next 6 years, and it will be funded in full without any increases in either borrowing or debt. This represents the biggest strengthening of our national defence in a generation, and as the NATO General Secretary said yesterday, it will ensure the UK remains by far the largest European defence spender in NATO, and it means we're the second biggest NATO spender overall. It will provide a very significant boost for the UK defence science, innovation and manufacturing. It will make our defence industries more resilient and bigger, and it will mean that we're able to restock some of those global supplies required in order to continue to ensure that we're not only able to provide our own armed forces, those in Ukraine, but also be a competitive export sector as well. We also recognise the important role that defence plays in our national resilience by developing a new plan that, for the first time, brings together the civil and the military planning for how we would respond in the most severe risks that face our country. And Mr. Speaker, our additional £75 billion on defence is also enabling us to ramp up that support for Ukraine. Honourable and right honourable members on both sides of the House have shared the government's concern about the warnings that President Zelensky has been issuing, and as most senior generals have confirmed, that their ability to match Russia's force is increasingly difficult. And so, as NATO partners, we're looking at each other to see that leadership. And the UK government has stepped forward. We're providing the alliance with the decisive leadership demanded in this knife-edge moment of this existential war. And so we've committed this week an extra £500 million of military aid to Ukraine this year, bringing our total package to £3 billion. And our total, in fact, since Putin's full-scale invasion, is now more than £12.5 billion, £7.5 billion of which is military aid. In addition, we've provided NATO partners with leadership by delving even deeper into our own military inventory to give Ukraine our largest package of equipment and support to date. Now, this support announced this week includes millions of rounds of ammunition, 1,600 key munitions, including air defence and precision long-range missiles, over 400 armoured, protected and all-terrain vehicles, as well as support with logistics to support and bolster the front lines, support to get the F-16 pilots who've trained in the UK into the air as soon as possible, and a further 60 boats to help Ukraine strengthen their remarkable grip over the Black Sea, including offshore raiding craft and dive boats. Our £75 billion defence investment will help Ukraine get back onto the front foot. And coupled with the reforms that we've introduced to make procurement faster and more effective, it will put our defence industrial base on a war footing. It will fire up the UK's defence industry, with an additional £10 billion over the next decade for munitions production. That will bring our total spend on munitions to around £25 billion over the same period. We're delivering for those who serve to guarantee our freedoms as well, with over £4 billion to be invested in upgrading accommodation to build new living quarters for our personnel over the next decade. And we're also working seamlessly with key allies to strengthen our collective deterrent and develop new, innovative capabilities. Just last month, I was in Australia to advance our AUKUS programme with our Australian and our US partners. This will develop and deliver a range of cutting-edge kit in addition to the next generation of nuclear-powered submarines. And at the end of last year, I was in Japan to advance our GCAP programme. That's the development of the 6th generation fighter jet with Italy and with Japan. And just last week, I was in Telford to see the first fully British tank for 22 years coming off the production line. And just one strand of our Future Soldier programme to make our army more integrated and much more lethal. Defence already, of course, supports tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, real quality to them in the UK, including over 200,000 directly in the industry. And our additional £75 billion will open up many more opportunities in regions up and down this country. Mr. Speaker, this is a turning point in UK defence. We must spend more because defence of the realm is the first duty of every government. And on this side of the House, we recognise that fact. But whilst I want to see peace and, of course, international order being restored, I'm also absolutely convinced that it's hopeful thinking, even complacency, to imagine that we can do that without ensuring we are better protected. The best way of keeping a country safe and to protect our way of life is deterrence. Being prepared, being clear-eyed about the threats we face, being clear about our capabilities, backing UK defence science, technology and innovation, carrying not just a big stick, but the most advanced and capable stick that we can possibly develop. And yes, using our military muscle alongside our allies. Our investment in our continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent makes would-be adversaries think twice. And on this side of the House, we haven't just come to the conclusion that our nation's nuclear deterrent is there because an election is approaching. We have always believed in our nuclear deterrent. This is an additional £75 billion boost for our armed forces. And in the build-up to the NATO summit in Washington, I'll do all I can to get alliance members to follow our lead, to bolster their armed forces, to strengthen their industrial base, invest in innovation, maximise their military deterrence, and to maximise their support for Ukraine, most importantly of all. Because in a more dangerous world, when we face an excess of authoritarian states, 2.5% must now become the new baseline for the entire alliance. If we're to deter, lead and defend, that is what is required of us. And I commend this statement to the House.
Secretary of State John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for the advance copy of his statement. There is much to welcome in this statement and more widely today, with the US Congress finally passing the bill for more military aid to Ukraine and the Prime Minister finally making a multi-year commitment to UK military aid beyond this year. We do indeed face a much more dangerous world, with British forces now in action defending international shipping in the Red Sea, reinforcing NATO allies on the Russian border and protecting us all 24/7. They are respected worldwide for their total professionalism. They require our support from all sides of this House. So we welcome the new commitments to Ukraine funding. We welcome the build-up stockpiles to boost defence exports, to give priority to domestic defence production, and to set up a new strategic headquarters in the MOD. All plans I've argued for in this post. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is right when he says the first duty of any government is to defend the country and keep its citizens safe. And Labour will always do what's required, spend what's required on defence. And the last time the UK did spend 2.5% of GDP on defence was in 2010 with Labour. Never matched in any one of the 14 Tory years since. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Labour leader said, "We want a fully funded plan for 2.5% of GDP on defence." We share the same ambition as the government because we must do more to deal with the growing threats. We want this to be fully costed and fully funded. We want it to be set out in the government's baseline budgets. This 2030 target is not. It's in a press release. Why was this 2030 plan not in last month's budget? Or any of the other 5 budgets and autumn statements since the government first promised to spend 2.5% by 2030 2 years ago? None hit 2.5%, none reversed real cuts in day-to-day defence spending, none matched Labour's record in government. If this 2030 plan had been in a budget, it would have been independently checked, openly costed and fully funded. So where is the additional money coming from? How much from which other R&D budgets? How much from cutting how many civil servants in which departments? Mr. Speaker, they've tried this trick before. In the 2015 Defence Review, ministers pledged to cut 30% of the MOD civil servants to make their defence spending plans add up. Civil servant numbers didn't go down, they went up. Not down to 41,000, but up to 63,000. Now, he's mentioned an additional 75 billion 5 times in his statement. Over the next 6 years, the government's official spending plans are based on a 0.5% real annual growth in core defence spending. Why has he invented his own zero growth baseline to produce this fake figure claiming an extra £75 billion for defence? Mr. Speaker, the public will judge ministers by what they do, not what they say. And over 14 years, they've hollowed out our armed forces. They've cut the army to its smallest size since Napoleon. They've missed their own recruitment targets each and every year. They've allowed morale to fall to record lows, and they've wasted at least $15 billion on mismanaging defence procurement. Mr. Speaker, everyone recognises defence spending must rise to deal with increasing threats. We have no access to classified threat assessments or military advice in opposition. So if we are elected to government, we'll conduct a strategic defence review within our first year to get to grips with the threats that we face, the capabilities that we need, the state of the armed forces and the resources available when we get to open the books. This is how Labour will manage the requirements for strong national security and the responsibility for sound public finances. Mr. Speaker, the Defence Secretary clearly likes Labour's plans for defence, as so much is now government policy. But there's still no Tory plan to reinforce homeland protections with a new strategic review, to fulfil NATO obligations in full with a NATO test on our major programmes, to renew the nation's contract with those who serve with an independent forces commissioner to make allies our strategic strength, with a new EU, French or German defence agreement. Mr. Speaker, with threats increasing and tensions growing, we must make Britain better defended. And with Labour, Britain will be better defended.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me just start on the areas that I agree with. He mentions how much we welcome the US Congress putting their $60 billion into the defence of Ukraine. It is something that we warmly welcome. As Churchill was reputed to once have said, America usually gets on and does the right thing when it's exhausted all other alternatives. And it took a long time, but we have got to the point where that money is going to come to Ukraine. And I think that is very, very welcome across this House. He says that he welcomes this announcement today, and then spends all his time explaining, or rather avoiding explaining, why they themselves are not backing 2.5%, with a schedule, with a timescale, with figures which have been published and are in the document produced yesterday and laid in the library of the House. He says, judge us by our action, not our words. You know what? We will, because 11 members of that side's front bench voted against Trident. So it's no good for him and the leader of the opposition to go up to Barrow and to claim that they're all in favour now of the nuclear weapons, of the nuclear defence, because they stood on a platform with a leader who wanted to scrap Trident, wanted to pull them out of NATO, wanted to turn the army into, what was it, a peace corps? Into a peace corps. And now they tell us, judge us on our actions. Well, where is the shadow foreign secretary who voted against Trident? Where is the shadow deputy prime minister who voted against Trident? Where is the shadow community secretary who voted against Trident? None of them today here on the front bench, none of them presumably in full agreement with the right honourable gentleman, because when it comes to the defence of the realm and when it comes to defending this country, this is the party that has always believed in our nuclear deterrent. We're upgrading it, we're making sure it's fit for purpose, and it's fine for him to come to this dispatch box, neither support the 2.5%, and the House will have noted that, and then also talk about a new review, yet another review. If the problem was having reviews in defence, there would be no issues at all. It is the last thing this country and armed forces require, is yet another review, delay, disruption and obfuscation.
Chair of the Select Committee.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right to say that we're continually asking more of our armed forces, as the Select Committee's recent report made clear. In that context, I greatly welcome the announcement and the increased investment. But what, of course, we want this to unleash is a triple whammy, one in which our industrial partners also seize the opportunity to invest heavily in capital equipment and in R&D, and in which our NATO allies also see this as a new benchmark to which those who don't already can also aspire and meet.
What are we doing to ensure we don't only make this investment, but we also achieve that triple whammy?
Well, my right honourable friend and chair of the Select Committee is absolutely right about the investment point. I spoke to my opposite number, the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, yesterday evening, and we were talking about how this will help to galvanise NATO in particular for greater investment, and specifically so that when we go to the NATO summit in Washington for the 75th anniversary, this new baseline is 2.5% rather than 2%, as was set by the UK actually back in 2014, with now, I think, 18 or so of the NATO's 32 members having reached that sum. So investment in that very important signal that's now sent to the whole industrial base for defence, I think, is a critical part of why it is very important to actually set out that plan and stick to it and actually agree to the 2.5% by 2030.
Martin Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State clearly has a Herculean task to find £75 billion. So let's seek some clarity on where that may be found. Though I have to say I do welcome the investment if it's in capability. And I do agree with the Shadow Defence Secretary as to why it wasn't in the budget. I think we all know, because it wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. But let me also welcome the the Secretary of State's investment in Ukraine on the back of the US's commitment. I have to say to your US colleagues, it was long overdue. So let me ask some specific questions. And it is the duty of opposition to challenge government, and we will have our differences. Now, with no increase in borrowing or debt, the implication is for deeper cuts to other public services, because if the government has assumed a baseline with spend frozen in cash terms as of GDP, as I think alluded to the Shadow Defence Secretary, that comes nowhere near £75 billion. Now, as myself coming from a services family, I wonder if the Secretary of State will commit to direct increase in spend on accommodation, training and recruitment as part of this proposal, given that we're at a near Napoleonic decline on the front line and where we have pushed members of the armed forces into food banks and near penury. Now, the Secretary of State and I, of course, will disagree on the nuclear deterrent, but I do wonder if he can answer one specific point while he retains it. The nuclear enterprise has been exposed as unaffordable in its latest report by the NEO. So what assurances can the Secretary of State give the House that the nuclear deterrent will not continue to cannibalise the MOD budget and specifically the £75 billion that he has proposed today?
Mr. Speaker, the first thing I should point out, actually, in the document that is in front of the House, that on page 20 in the annex, it actually describes the uplift in defence budget. We've headlined it as £75 billion. In fact, when you go through and you add up the individual year on year, it actually reaches £77 billion of expenditure. You can see exactly there how we'll get to it. Secondly, it is fully funded. In particular, and I know that the party opposite doesn't like the idea, but we're going to remove 72,000 civil servants from the system, not because we don't think they're good people, and fortunately, with low unemployment, we know they'll be gainfully employed elsewhere, but because we want to get back to the size of the civil servants that we had before COVID, before it expanded greatly, and we see no reason to continue to run a civil service with 70,000 additional people each year when that money could be going into the defence of the realm. He asks about our commitment to armed forces and personnel and their families and accommodation. He may have missed it in my statement, but I mentioned £4 billion over this period that we'll now be investing thanks to this big uplift in their accommodation and conditions. And he'll be aware, I think, that last year there were a lot of problems with leaks and boilers not being fixed for considerable periods of time. There haven't been those stories this year because we've got on top of that with £400 million and making sure the contractors are doing their job. And as he rightly says, we have our differences on things like nuclear deterrence. But I have to say, if there's something that benefits Scotland in particular, I would suggest that what goes on at Faslane, the extraordinary high-quality jobs that produces, and the proud part they play in this nation's defence.
Sir Julian Lewis, Chair of the Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The main reason why this welcome uplift has come when it has been because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that if Russia and Putin are seen to fail in Ukraine, then the threat to NATO will be put back for at least a generation. Conversely, if they succeed, the threat to NATO will intensify. So will he do everything he can to persuade our allies, and especially certain parts of the United States political new establishment, that the success of Ukraine is essential for the peace of Europe and indeed the peace of the world?
All right, on friends, absolutely right. Although this is £75 billion, and although it takes our budget to 2.5% of GDP, this is a fraction of what it would cost if Putin were successful in Ukraine. There is no chance he would stop there, none. And others would look at this, autocrats elsewhere, and they would exploit the idea that all you have to do is outweight the West, and we'll get bored of it, some form of attention deficit, and we'll give up defending the things that we said we would never stop defending. And that, in the end, would cost us all a huge amount more.
Come in, John.
Can I first of all congratulate the Secretary of State on his stellar Used Car Salesman Act, which we've come to get used to. But can I, on the 26th of March this year, he appeared before the Defence Select Committee along with officials. His Strategic Finance Director confirmed that next year, when you take Ukraine funding out of the budget, the defence budget falls. So can he tell the House how he reconciles that fact, confirmed by his own officials, with his claim today and the Prime Minister's yesterday of putting this country on a war footing?
Well, I'm really sorry that the Honourable Gentleman cheapens what is a very, very important discussion about the defence of the realm with such a ridiculous remark. We all come here in the spirit to discuss these things in a manner which I think is important given the subject issue. He mentions and asks the question about Ukraine. Look, Ukraine is part of what our armed forces and this country are having to deal with. And we don't ask America to strip out their help to Ukraine in the same way as we didn't ask them to strip out their help to Afghanistan or ours or Iraq or ours, because it is part of our core defence budget. And yesterday, and I didn't mention this in my statement, and perhaps on this basis, the Honourable Gentleman may be forgiven, Right Honourable, may be forgiven, because we also said yesterday that our enhanced amount of money to Ukraine isn't now just for this year. We are going to carry on doing that every single year into the future. So yes, it is part of our core expense.
Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Secretary of State for obtaining this massive £75 billion increase in defence, which theoretically would actually allow us to buy 20 new Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers. At the risk of upsetting our excellent First Sea Lord, we're not likely to do that, but we are putting our defence industry on a war footing. So can we do the concomitant thing and create a war reserve of equipment with older Typhoons, older warships and older armoured vehicles, so that if we had to fight at short notice, we have enough equipment to do it, and so we can tell our adversaries, when we say civis pacem parabellum, we actually mean it.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his words, but not just for that, but for his constant campaigning on this subject. Those of us who've been subject to him in a select committee know that he knows his facts, knows what he's talking about, and has done as much as anybody to ensure that this uplift is happening. I can confirm to the House we won't be using the £75 billion for 20 new aircraft carriers. He mentions an interesting point about what we could do with the older equipment. I have to say to my right honourable friend, right now I'm much more minded to send that equipment to Ukraine, and that's why yesterday I pulled together the biggest package of donation to date in this now into the third-year war of equipment to Ukraine. I think for the time being we'll be sending it in the easterly direction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State what he believes a war footing is?
Very simply, actually, Ukraine has taught a lot to the world about this. When it comes to doing things like producing sufficient munitions to restock the Ukrainians, it's very difficult to do that instantaneously, in fact impossible. And so you've got this global competition for 155s or for missiles, and what we want to do is make sure that our own industrial defence estate is able to produce those things by telling them they're on a war footing, by putting £75 billion more in, and critically, by naming the date by which we'll get there, we put that industry on that war footing.
Brax.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for his stalwart stubbornness in getting this raise, so important raise, in defence spending, and I congratulate him. He and I both know, actually, that a lot more money is needed, but this is a step in the right direction. He's off shortly to meet NATO members, and I fear he's got a lot of work to do, because, for example, if you look at the Straits of Hormuz, one of the major trade routes for NATO and the West, only 2 NATO members are actually prepared to open fire on the Houthis. So does he feel that there's a lot of work to do when he goes to meet these NATO members, that they step up and spend 2.5% on defence, as they should do and as we are going to do?
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank my gallant friend for his comments. He's absolutely right to point out that when it comes to being prepared to use the abilities that we have, this is a country, one of the only countries, which has both the global reach but also the desire and the preparedness to use them. That's why we end up in the Red Sea with the Houthis defending ships, and I can report there's been a particular incident today along these lines with our armed forces in action, and we can be very proud of everything that they do for us.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, may I welcome this statement about increased defence spending, albeit that it is about a time 6 years hence, rather than being specific about funding in the intervening years. There are 18 of 32 NATO members that are still not spending even 2% of GDP, including France, Spain and Italy. Encouraging them to spend more isn't so much about fairness, it's about helping to persuade sceptics in the United States that North America should remain engaged in Europe. Leverage with the NATO members at the summit in July is too late. What additional commitments did he and others in government obtain from allies before announcing the 2030 pledge?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I can assure the honourable gentleman that this actually starts this year. The £500 million is this year's budget. We've opted to give that money directly to Ukraine in addition to the money that we're gifting to them, bringing us to £3 billion in total. Secondly, I'd very gently point out, I don't think I've ever heard the Lib Dem benches arguing for more defence spending, but I welcome them strongly to this cause. I agree with him entirely that 2%, which we ourselves set back in 2014, is no longer the baseline that we should be working to. I'd also gently point out to him that the reason that Trident and in particular the subs have taken some time to replace was a small period in coalition when we couldn't get our Lib Dem partners to agree to get on with the job.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Deputy Speaker, and if I may just in passing pay tribute to the late Frank Field, who voted for the renewal of Trident, unlike many on the front bench, and would have understood that deepening our defence capability in the conventional forces is a vital part of the deterrence that NATO provides for the security of Europe. And I commend my right honourable friend and the government for leading the way on this and setting the example by leadership.
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend and actually also add my condolences to those others in the House this afternoon, to Frank Field, who was a great statesman, had really innovative ideas about welfare reform, which it took this government to actually enact, and is a great loss to us all. And I agree with him entirely about the leadership in NATO. Getting to 2.5%, I was talking to the NATO Secretary-General about this yesterday. We must make sure that this is the new level at which people operate. And if they did, if everyone joined us at 2.5%, then there'd be £135 billion per annum more in the collective NATO budget. It would make a huge difference.
Dame Nia Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, Labour is absolutely committed to reaching 2.5%, and we very much welcome the additional £500 million for Ukraine. But time is absolutely of the essence. So what is the Secretary of State doing to speed up the delivery of those much-needed military supplies to the front line in Ukraine?
Good question. I very warmly welcome the Honourable Lady's comments, and I very much hope that her front bench, who haven't attached the timeline that she urges to this, are listening closely to her. In terms of delivery of those items to the front line, we will be extremely fast in a matter of days into weeks on delivering quite a lot of the items that we have outlined in a very extensive package yesterday. They do come into a lot of different forms, and some, by their physical nature, will take longer to deliver than others. But that delivery we can expect in the next few days into weeks.
David Mandel.
Welcome my right honourable friend's announcement, and indeed the decision finally made in the United States. Can my right honourable friend confirm that investment will not just go into tech, but will go into the logistic and warehousing and background facilities here in the UK, such as at MOD Longtown, a very important employer for my constituency, to ensure that our frontline forces have the best supplied kit that they could possibly have?
My right honourable friend can absolutely have that reassurance. In fact, one of the things we know is that in order to run a really lethal and effective armed forces, the support is actually extraordinarily important. So, yes, he absolutely has my guarantee of that.
Yeah. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2010, the government, with their Liberal Democrat partners, have missed recruitment targets every year, with the Times warning that the Army could fall to 70,000 full-time equivalents. What is the Defence Secretary doing to ensure that those who wish to serve and defend our country are not put off by the broken recruitment system?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be very pleased to hear that at the beginning of this year, in January, and then reflected in February as well, we had an 8-year high in applications for the Army, reflected also through the other services. I do agree we need to be much more effective at getting people who've applied, made the application, to getting right the way through the system. It takes too long. I think it's too disparate, people having to come for an initial interview, go away, come back for a medical. Why not do all those things at once? But other things are really helping as well. There was a nearly 10% pay increase for the lesser paid members of our armed forces this last year. That, I think, has helped with recruitment, and then, of course, people seeing our armed forces in so much action has also helped. But I agree, and my right honourable friend is spending a lot of time ensuring that we do make sure that the many recommendations, I think 67, in the Hawthorne-Waite review are put in place as quickly as possible.
Bias Elwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I join many voices that have for some time called for an increase in defence spending, so we very much welcome this. And I think privately the Defence Secretary has been hoping this day would come as well. So congratulations for the work he has done behind the scenes to ensure this funding is secured. State-on-state conflict has returned in Europe. The world is more dangerous, more contested, more polarised. Could he expand a little the consequences to UK security and to the UK economy if Russia wins? And before rushing in to spend these increased funds, could he recognise the need to consider the full spectrum of threats and warfare that we face so money is wisely spent?
Well, my right honourable and gallant friend has been a very important part of ensuring that we've got to today. I hadn't realised I'd been keeping my own desire to reach this quite so secret as he describes. He is also correct that the implication of Russia winning this war would be absolutely horrendous. The costs would make the costs of, for example, what this country had to put up with COVID seem small by comparison to what could then happen if other autocratic states decide to take a chunk of other people's land, which could have direct impact on our own economy, and therefore it is absolutely right. This is not, in my view, money that we're spending. This is money that we are investing in our own security to make sure that Russia and other despotic leaders like Putin never think they can try it on with us. We will be investing it extremely wisely in many of the programmes that he and other members across this House are already familiar with, as well as innovative new areas like the Dragonfire.
Drew Hendry.
Deputy Speaker, and can we first of all thank the urgent support for Ukraine? Thank you for the urgent support for Ukraine. It's much needed just now. But given that the Institute for Fiscal Studies pointed out the Chancellor's budget that there was a conspiracy of silence between the government and the Labour Party for following the fiscal rules about where £20 billion worth of cuts would come in public services, and that this announcement, according to them, adds another up to £9 billion of cuts to public services, can he explain where those cuts are going to be undertaken?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've already laid out this plan is fully cost and funded, and we've done that by, as I mentioned to the House already, saying that we'll reduce the size of the civil service by 72,000. Now, that's not a one-off cut. That's 72,000 each year of money which is not being paid and therefore helps to fund. And there are some other things that no doubt the Chancellor will wish to get into. But if he takes a look, and I don't know whether he has yet, at page 20 and the annex, he'll see how this is all set out on the page.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Deputy Speaker, may I first of all absolutely welcome this very important investment in defence. As my right honourable friend says, the world is a very changed place and it's very important. And I'm sure he'd agree with me that defence is indeed a public service. Just in terms of the extra funding and the projects he's announced, can I ask my right honourable friend to make sure he speaks to the Treasury that the programmes are fully funded and not just capital investment? Because the Treasury have a habit of saying it's fine for capital investment, but let's not worry about revenue. And these projects will need revenue. So can I make sure he has those conversations with the Treasury?
Very good point. My right honourable friend makes a very clear point based on his own experience, I believe, of the department. You've got to make sure that you're just not funding the capital, but that you have the resource to then run the equipment. I think it's a very, very important point he raises. This budget enables us to ensure that that is very much properly done.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I also welcome the 2.5% increase. The world is definitely a more dangerous place and has become so over the last 14 years. I can only suppose that the announcement wasn't made in last month's budget because it would have come under the scrutiny of the OBR. But could the Defence Secretary mention exactly what proportion of this 2.5% will be spent on cyber security and also on armed services personnel?
Well, I should point out to the House, we've always said that we would do this when conditions allowed. Inflation last week fell to just above 3%, 3.2%, down from over 11%. We saw 10 days ago Iran fire hundreds of missiles at a democratic state. We were involved in part in their collective defence. And I think it is therefore to say both the world is showing itself to be even more dangerous and we have reached the point where we are seeing growth back in the economy, inflation falling, and now is a right time to do this. She asked a very specific point actually about the sums which will go into, for example, cyber or perhaps into space. I don't have those figures on me. I'd be very happy to write to her with a sort of overview because I think it will take a bit of collation to work out exactly what that would mean from the existing budget, not in no small part because quite a lot of what happens in STRATCOM, so Strategic Command, which covers those areas, crosses over into other parts of the armed forces, so it's not quite a simple question to answer.
Flick Drummond.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I say this very welcome statement, so thank you very much. My right honourable friend mentioned the Rick Haythorne-Thwaites report, so I was wondering when we were going to get an update, in particular more about the plan to spend the £4 million investment in the service families accommodation.
Very soon, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Harry.
Thank you very much. I do accept the need for additional defence spending, but can I ask the Defence Secretary for a reassurance that the government's strategy for UK and indeed global security going forward will have an appropriate balance of hard and soft power? By that I mean ongoing investment in diplomacy, humanitarian assistance, international development, including potentially the restoration of the 0.7% of GNI target, and indeed support for the international rules-based order.
Well, I certainly reassure the honourable gentleman that that is something that we're always at MOD looking to do. So we've just made our 7th or perhaps now 8th drop into Gaza of food aid using the RAF. We're working with the Americans on other solutions, including the PIR, and I work very closely with the FCDO. Indeed, I used to be a DFID minister, so I'm well aware of the issues that he is raising. And MOD will always look to assist wherever we can with our armed forces, often combining that hard and soft power together.
James Sunderland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This has been a good week for defence, and I commend the government on its 2.5% commitment. But the issue, of course, is how we spend it. Rather perhaps than focus on exquisite exclusivity, or heaven forbid, indulge single-service bad behaviour, could the Defence Secretary please confirm to the House that the money will be spent on plugging existing capability gaps, on better operating the platforms that we do have, and ensuring that we have the activity, the resilience, and also the sustainment to make sure that our forces maintain and enhance their world-leading, persistent global posture?
It's an excellent question. My right honourable friend, the Defence Procurement Minister, has done an outstanding job in a publication that I recommend to everyone in the House, even though the name is the Integrated Procurement Model. It is much more exciting than that sounds. It has, for example, already been the new model responsible for bringing forward the procurement of, again, the Dragonfire by 5 years, because rather than trying to create some exquisite, unbelievably complicated, never quite right piece of equipment, this will instead bring things into the field and then allow them to be spiraled, developed further. So my honourable friend's absolutely right about the way that we're going to use this money much more intelligently in order to make sure we get kit into the field and then expand and improve it from there.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While welcoming the 2.5%, the modus operandus of this particular Secretary of State is to come to this House, announce billions of pounds to get people salivating about it, only for it never, ever to happen. Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2, we know it, the country knows it, the brass knows it. So, the Times is reporting that we're going to fall below 70,000 full-time equivalent troops. Where will we be in terms of boots on the ground in a year's time, Secretary of State?
Right. I should say to the honourable gentleman that the way this won't happen is if the public go out and vote for his party, because I haven't heard this afternoon that they're committed to making it happen. So if you want to see 2.5% by 2030, vote Conservative. That's what we're going to give you. I think I'll leave it there.
Sir Simon Clarke.
Briefly want to add my tribute to the late Frank Field. He was an extraordinary man and a great parliamentarian. In welcoming the announcement of the additional £75 billion over the next 6 years, which is welcome and much needed, can I urge the Secretary of State to consider the potential for a 5th successor-class submarine, noting that the patrol times for the Vanguard class are now approaching 200 days. That is not sustainable. It's vital, I think, that we give ourselves as much operational capacity as we can with our deterrent.
Well, of course, we'll always keep a very close eye, I say this to my right honourable friend, on the way that we are able to ensure the constant at-sea nuclear defence. I can confirm it has been at sea every single day for 54 years, and we do not intend to have that broken. Whether that requires, quite what that requires is a matter for defence study. As he knows, we're committed to 4 ships. There'll be far more modern in the dreadnoughts, and therefore, as with any modern piece of equipment, likely to be with greater reliability as well. But we will not let this country down when it comes to our nuclear deterrent. And this isn't something, as I said in my comments, my statement, just because we're approaching an election. We have always believed in our nuclear deterrent, and we always will.
Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Even Winston Churchill recognised that modern conflicts are fought by peoples, not by armies. Hence why the NHS and the welfare state were the genesis and formed from World War II. Yet now, while military spending is increasing, public services are collapsing. Is it not as important now to wage war on poverty on home as it is to prepare for war abroad? And if there requires to be an increase in the military and defence expenditure, surely that should come from the cancellation of the failed Trident project that is impoverishing the military services, rather than from public services. Why should the people pay for their wars?
I quite literally, Madam Deputy Speaker, could not disagree with the honourable gentleman any more strongly. I know that even in my time as Defence Secretary, there are decisions that I've made that if we had not had the nuclear deterrent, I would have hesitated in making. It protects us every single day in ways which aren't always immediately obvious to everyone. And the idea that by not investing in our defence, we would somehow be safer, that somehow all that money would be available to invest in all these other public services is, I think, to misunderstand the first principle of every government. We are here to defend the realm, without which there would be nothing to pay for internally, because we wouldn't be safe externally.
Sir Edward Lee.
In the 1930s, a wise government ensured that RAF airfields were upgraded and improved, and that saved us from extinction in 1940. Well, if we are to be on a war footing, will the Secretary of State remind the Home Office that it is their duty to maintain the best runway in Europe, 10,000 feet long, at RAF Scampton, instead of letting it rot at present? And if they're incapable of doing it, will they hand it over to Scampton Holdings as soon as possible, as we've argued for 15 months, so it can be used, improved, and be available for a future emergency?
Well, my right honourable friend is speaking to the converted as a keen pilot. I agree with him entirely, and in fact, it usually works the other way around, but I will offer him a meeting so that we can discuss RAF Scampton and its long-term future rather than the short-term in more detail.
Jane Kitchen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Coming from a Labour family, it is important to me that Labour are also wanting to reach 2.5%. Our ambition is no less than the government. The Defence Secretary has said that this defence spending increase will be funded in part by big cuts in the civil servants. So, how much of this cut will be in the MOD civilian workforce, and will the RFA be exempt?
Well, firstly, can I welcome the Honourable Lady's support for this package, for the 2.5%, and gently suggest that conversations with her own front bench would be important at this point in the interest of national security, that both sides sign up to 2.5% by a deadline, which we note this afternoon has not happened. She asked a specific question about the reduction. It would be 10,000 reduction by 2028 in the MOD. Just to be clear, this is from about 60,000 to 50,000. I personally believe that is exactly the right thing to do. If that is helping to pay for our brave men and women in the armed forces out in the country, less bureaucracy and more action, I think that's a good thing.
Mark Pritchard.
For his recent visit to Shropshire, which he referenced, and also welcome his statement, and indeed the statement of the Prime Minister yesterday. This is record investment into UK defence, which will be very welcome in Shropshire. Would he like to take this opportunity to put on record his thanks for all those that work in uniform and civilians at RAF Cosford, MOD Donington, Babcock, and indeed RBSL BAE Systems, which he recently visited, and confirm that the UK's defence and Shropshire's defence is secure with this government?
Well, I warmly join my right honourable friend in sending exactly that message. As he says, just last week, I was up at looking at the Challenger 3 coming off the production line, the first prototypes, in his patch, and my only regret was that I wasn't able to see him at the same time.
Deirdre Brock.
Deputy Speaker, my written questions this week uncovered another worrying increase in nuclear safety events at nuclear weapon sites in 2023, with the first Category A safety breach in 15 years at Faslane and the highest number of Category B incidents since 2006. Category A incidents defined as those that had an actual or high potential for radioactive release to the environment in breach of safety limits. A former chief advisor to a prime minister described existing nuclear stock as rotting and a dangerous disaster. Can he tell us how much of this extra spend will go towards ensuring existing nuclear sites, at the very least, don't deteriorate further, threatening the health and safety of armed forces, staff and surrounding populations?
Well, I'm pleased to report to the Honourable Lady that our defence, and particularly when it comes to our nuclear estate, standards are extremely high. Whenever an issue is found, it is properly and thoroughly investigated. Again, she's right to say that it's very important that we continue to invest in that. So, again, this money is good news. Obviously, every bit helps, and we want to make sure that it's being spent appropriately. As it so happens, we do appropriately fund the nuclear estate, but this will help to make sure that that is put well beyond doubt.
James Gray.
This very welcome announcement of a no-strings-attached, guaranteed move to 2.5% of GDP sends a very, very powerful message indeed to two groups of people. First of all, our NATO partners, and secondly, to our adversaries around the world. But would the Secretary of State not agree with me that that powerful message is undermined by what I can only describe as the mealy-mouthed response of the front benches, both the Labour and Liberal Democrat and Scotland front benches this afternoon? If they will not support what we are doing, what sort of message does that send to Putin and to other enemies? Surely what we don't want now is cross-party consensus on this. It has to be 2.5%, and Labour has to side with us on it.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I could not agree with my honourable friend more.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just take this opportunity to pay tribute to the reservists based in Croydon, who among many roles have been in Estonia helping to keep us all safe. Labour wants to reach 2.5%, but my friend the Shadow Defence Secretary asked why there is no budget line or fully funded plans for this announcement. And this appears to be a bit of a pattern across government. Only yesterday I learnt that a £1 billion announcement made about carbon capture and storage several years ago still appears nowhere on a Treasury budget line. If the government plays so fast and loose with our public funding, how on earth is the Secretary of State going to deliver the economic stability on which our defence spending relies?
Well, I really encourage the Honourable Lady, and in fact all of the benches opposite, to have a closer look at what we announced yesterday, because this is a fully funded announcement. We've explained where the money is going to come from. We've set out in tables that you can go and read, Madam Deputy Speaker, the funding for the £75 billion. Now, there is a choice, and it is true that choice exists, that I know the front bench needs to talk not only to their backbenchers about, because they won't agree with increasing to 2.5% by 2030, but unfortunately, many of them within their front benches as well, 11 in particular. Those will be the ones who have voted against Trident, some of whom wanted to leave our nuclear deterrent behind and possibly even leave NATO as well. But on this side of the House, I can say we are entirely united in the idea of spending 2.5%, setting a date for it now, setting out how that spending is going to work, and making the choices to get there.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome this investment, which rightly recognises the increasingly unstable world in which we're operating. Many of our military capabilities are, of course, powered by advanced semiconductors, and recent years have shown how fragile these supply chains can be. So could the Secretary of State set out what the government is doing to develop alliances, strong alliances, focused on securing our supply of this vital component?
My honourable friend's absolutely right. Indeed, in another role as Business Secretary, I took the decision personally on Newport wafer fab, and it very much highlighted to me the importance of our own supply chain for advanced semiconductors, particularly now in the defence realm as well. As one of the reasons why in this plan that we published yesterday, we've committed to a new level of 5% of R&D for defence, to make sure that we are both researching, developing, and then through the expansion of the military capability, the industrial base, producing as well the things that we need for our armed forces.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Labour wants to reach 2.5%. I don't know how many more of my colleagues on these benches need to say that before it actually gets
through, and my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, said that very clearly in his contributions, if anybody was listening. However, the Secretary of State has said repeatedly on the media rounds this morning and in the Chamber today that on page 20 we can find the fully costed plan. Now, bearing in mind that there is no mention on page 20 of how this 2.5% will be reached through the cuts to the civil service, which the Secretary of State's given, and also let's bear in mind that the entire civil service budget is only 16.6 billion. Where is the fully funded plan? Because it is not on page 20.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady once again asserts, as if you just asserted often enough, and I wrote down what she said, that their side, she says, wants to reach 2.5%. You can't just assert it. You have to actually will the means to get there, and I did not hear that from the front bench this morning. They did not say that in response to the announcement yesterday. Now, as in all normal cases, and particularly through spending reviews, the Treasury will set out all of the numbers going forward, but the fact of the matter is the figures published yesterday show £75 billion more being spent, actually 77 billion, being spent from this year through to the end of the decade, in part paid for by 72,000 civil servants being removed from the system so we get back to where we were before COVID. Now if Labour doesn't want to follow that particular approach, they have another one they could follow, but she can't just assert that they agree without actually explaining how they're doing it.
In the Register of Members' Interests, I also warmly welcome this increase to 2.5% of defence spending, and I congratulate my right honourable friend and the Prime Minister on the leadership role they're providing to NATO. Could he elaborate a little bit more on the balance of where this extra money will go in terms of meeting the existing challenges in the equipment plan and introducing innovative new capability through the new procurement model that he was commending to the House earlier?
The real approach here will be to make sure that we are both ensuring that we're delivering the things that we've already said that we'll deliver in a changing world where we have, the threat of Iran, the threat of Russia, a much more assertive China, a nuclear armed North Korea. We're making sure that in those circumstances we adjust our programme to make sure it does what is required. And the new innovations, as I think you will have gathered from my comments about 5% being spent on R&D, are very, very important to us. I can see how now, in an asymmetric war situation, you can end up with the entire Black Sea fleet, Russia's Black Sea fleet, being made inoperative by a navy, Ukraine's, who have no fleet at all, a ghost fleet. And so we do need to look at the way that we do all of that, and this money will be used wisely in that context.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister as well, and our government for their clear commitment to the 2.5%. And also can I also thank him for the commitment of extra £500 million of aid for Ukraine. Really, really important. I think our Secretary of State and our government is setting the target for the rest of NATO to follow, and I hope that they will do that. I welcome very much the news of the increase in defence spending, which is something that my party, the Democratic Unionist Party, and myself have pushed for. But how much of the increase will be feet on the ground, and how much will be enhanced cyber security? Thank you so much.
Well, in terms of personnel, we're sticking with the Defence Review and the refresh, which set out the exact numbers. I think it is 188,000 through all three services. I've explained in the answer to colleagues previously about the extent to which new technology is really helping to shape our thinking, but also the lessons from Ukraine, and in particular the need to have munitions available and have larger stockpiles available. There are, of course, many excellent locations, including in Northern Ireland, where more munitions and missiles are being created as we speak, with something like an 8 times expansion. And I look forward to coming visiting some of those who will enjoy the additional £10 billion, bringing the total to, I think, about £25 billion over the next few weeks.
I am anxious to make sure that all colleagues get in, but I would urge brief questions so the Secretary of State can give brief answers. John Barron.
Deputy Speaker, and my right honourable friend will know from PMQs that as chair of the 1922 Defence Committee, this whole party welcomes this announcement. But can I suggest to him that a message from the government, would carry so much greater resonance globally if the official opposition could also sign up to it? I can assure him, as a former member of the armed forces, that actually when the country is speaking as a whole, official opposition and government together, that carries a much greater weight for the good of the country internationally.
My gallant friend's absolutely right. We've seen how that has worked with Ukraine, and I'm sorry it's not working today with the 2.5% and the timeline to get there. I'm afraid it does once again prove that this country's safety is really in the right hands when Conservatives are in power.
Rachel McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just echo the words of the Secretary-General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, yesterday, who, after this defence spending announcement, said, yet again, the United Kingdom was leading by example. In terms of the £500 million support package for Ukraine, and having seen the awful pictures of missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, including the destruction of the TV tower in Kharkiv in the past 48 hours, can my right honourable friend confirm that the much-needed ammunition and missile systems will be over in Ukraine as soon as possible to aid their fight against Russian aggression?
My honourable friend's absolutely right, both about what the Secretary-General said, that we are leading NATO in this regard, but also about the absolute importance of us being there for Ukraine. We cannot afford for this war to be lost. It won't be lost. And I can also confirm to him that there's a comprehensive list of the items that we'll now be supplying that I'll make sure he receives.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was widely reported some months ago that my right honourable friend, along with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, had written to the Prime Minister setting out their concerns about the future of Scunthorpe's blast furnaces. For all the reasons he has stated today, this is more important than ever. So can I commend him for his foresight prior to his current role? And can I ask that he will consider the importance of good quality British-made steel in our nation's defence capabilities?
Well, I well remember the pretty much constant lobbying from my honourable friend. She's a great champion for her steelworks, and of course her comments about the importance of British steel being used in British defence is taken on board.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the statement today absolutely answers the widespread assessments of the increase of risk in the world, and we should all be grateful for that. Could my right honourable friend confirm that he, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister are also discussing with our European partners in NATO their contributions, and could he let the House know how important this is both to the current US administration and any future ones' commitment to NATO as well? Lastly, does he agree with me that innovation from the private sector, like Roke, which has recently opened an office in Gloucester, is going to be an important part of our defence procurement?
Well, he's absolutely right about ensuring we use this to persuade other NATO members to do the same thing. I can tell him that I was pretty proactively speaking to and texting my colleagues throughout NATO and beyond on this just yesterday, and receiving very encouraging responses. And I look forward to hearing more about the company in his constituency.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend and his ministers for the work they've been doing to reform defence procurement, rightly given the significant increase in spending announced by the Prime Minister. Could the Secretary of State just set out how these changes will ensure our military forces receive equipment more quickly, and in particular how it will benefit British manufacturers, particularly so that they can get opportunities from global export?
Well, on that last point, the integrated procurement plan, brilliantly created by my honourable friend, Minister for Defence Procurement, has ensured that export and the exportability is a key part of the contract. So that is going to cover that area of it. Quicker, I mentioned before about how we've already used his model to speed up the production of the Dragonfire in this particular case. We'll also use this integrated procurement model to make sure we don't over-spec things so they become a bit like... I wasn't going to say Ajax, but I'm going to say it. Ajax. Which became overspec to the point where it became a very delayed project. Fortunately, now back on track.
John Bailey.
Because Stroud constituents will welcome the Prime Minister's boost for defence spending and ongoing focus on the dangers that we all face. Now, the Stroud district is blessed with many strategically important businesses like Stellar Systems, who I was with on Friday, Retro Track and Air, Impcross, to name but a few. These are innovative, nimble and agile companies doing extraordinary things. So on behalf of all the SMEs, small businesses, small family businesses who are playing their part at protecting our country and others around the UK, will the Secretary of State confirm that SMEs will get their fair crack at contracts and that the bigger boys will pay them on time to keep them alive for the benefits of all?
Well, my honourable friend's absolutely right, and I predict that companies in Stroud will do very well from this if they're producing innovative and useful equipment for our armed forces. I absolutely take on board her point about small, medium-sized enterprises. When I was running my printing business and companies would pay late, it would put huge pressure on cash flow. One of the great things about what this government has done is we've sped up the necessity for these large organisations, particularly the primes, to be paying properly and on time.
Marco Longi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the £75 billion investment, it's a great announcement today, Secretary of State, and does he agree with me that this sends a very clear signal to our brave armed forces that it is this side of the House that backs them, that it sends a signal to the country that it is this side of the House that backs defence of the realm, and it sends a very clear signal to our supply chain up and down the country, such as the many that I know in my constituency of Dudley, that we back their job security. But it also, Mr. Secretary of State, I believe, exposes that side for having no plan at all for defence.
Well, my honourable friends hit the nail on the head. The Prime Minister made this announcement yesterday in front of British troops out in Poland doing incredible work. I think the reassurance of the idea that there is a period of time which leads to the 2.5% with the first increase coming immediately really helps them to do their job, because they know that they are wanted, trusted, and that we honour their work. I agree with other comments that have been made. It's a shame that's not entirely cross-party.
Stevenson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I warmly welcome this announcement. The Secretary of State was kind enough to call in on me in Wolverhampton North East last week, and I spoke about the importance of aerospace to my local economy with companies like HS Marston, Collins and Moog Aerospace. How can he ensure that those companies benefit from the highly skilled, well-paid jobs that this uplift in spending will bring? And does he agree with me that industry needs that certainty of cross-party agreement in order to make those investments, and the Labour Party needs to step up?
Very much enjoyed my visit to her constituency, and she was indeed telling me about the defence companies that are so vibrant in her area, and I think the future looks incredibly bright for them, given the amount that we're investing, given that defence is typically an extremely well-paid profession with enormous ability for new apprentices and graduates in particular to be recruited, and so I think her constituents will be very happy about this announcement.
Neil Hudson.
I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for this very welcome announcement of increased defence spending to 2.5% and for the leadership on funding and support for Ukraine. For the sake of freedom, democracy and global safety, it is so important that Ukraine prevails. This announcement shows that it's our Conservative government that will protect our nation and stand with our allies in the face of increasing international threats. Can the Secretary of State confirm that this sensible linear increase in funding on defence will help our defence industry in parallel to ramp up production, meaning that our armed forces will be supported, capable and resilient to be able to keep us and our allies safe?
I absolutely can confirm that, and one of the features of the way that we've done this is to create a straight line from next year to 2030 to make sure that industrial capacity can ramp up with certainty behind it. So I'm very pleased to confirm the answer is yes.
Danny Kruger.
Deputy Speaker, the Chief of the Defence Staff from Estonia was in Salisbury Plain in my constituency last week, and he told us that his country has 40,000 men and women in their Army Reserve ready at 24 hours notice to serve. I call that being on a war footing, considering they have a population 50 times smaller than ours. I'm not proposing we try and replicate that proportionally. That would mean a 2 million strong reserve. But will he give consideration to using some of this money to boosting our very important reserves?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend will know that we are twinned with Estonia through NATO, and we provide protection for them. They are, of course, very much on the front line with Russia in a way that we're fortunate not to be, so that rather than use some of our 30,000 reserves currently, we're able to use the many other things that we bring to NATO and to their protection, including the ability to provide them with personnel and equipment, which is something that we do on a very regular basis.
Simon Fell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend for the work he's done in setting this new 2.5% baseline? It will reassure our allies, send an important message to our adversaries, and also strengthen our industrial base too. And can I thank him for the work he played in securing £220 million for Barrow as well as the Team Barrow project, securing our future but also easing delivery of Dreadnought and SSN AUKUS. But of course, Barrow Shipyard isn't alone in delivering the submarine enterprise. So could my right honourable friend confirm that some of this £75 billion will be spent on other key sites such as Faslane, Devonport and others?
But absolutely can confirm to him that this is intended to benefit across the country. And actually, in the document itself that we published yesterday, there's a great map which shows all the different areas of the country and how they're going to benefit each region as well. It's on page 10 for reference, and as he rightly says, not just in our nuclear estate but throughout the defence estate, there isn't a constituency in this House which does not benefit from the £75 billion announcement yesterday. It's time for others to follow it.
Robin Miller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I add my own tribute to the late Lord Field and for him taking the time to talk to this Conservative councillor about a concern that we shared for the weakest and most vulnerable in society, something that reaches across the aisles. There's no doubt the international threat is developing and the world is a more dangerous place, so I really welcome this statement today. And what I hear is an investment in the armed forces we need, not necessarily the armed forces we had. But does my right honourable friend then share my concern that the statement from the opposition that they are planning to conduct a review actually is verging on the careless, in that it only gives comfort to those who seek this UK harm?
He's absolutely right about the armed forces that we need, not the armed forces that we had. And we want our armed forces to be lethal, quick, agile, capable, and that is why it's so important that we put the £75 billion in. But he's also right to point out that to now have yet another review is simply to invite chaos and delay at exactly the time our adversaries are looking at us and looking for us to get on with the job of delivering this 2.5%, or rather they're hoping we don't, and I'm afraid it rather plays into our adversaries' hands not to do this.
In leading.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for the announcement of 2.5% in defence spending by 2030. And would my right honourable friend please acknowledge the fantastic effort delivered by our reserve forces, something I had the pleasure to see myself on last Saturday in Northumberland.
I absolutely welcome my honourable friend's comments. I do join him, and there are many reserves, including in this House, including Minister for Defence and People. And we thank them all for their service, the time they give, and also their employers who give their time back to them to be able to be reservists. And we're very grateful for all that they do.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Point of order, Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to raise a point of order regarding the information we've been receiving in this House about the government's ongoing arms exports to Israel, about which the Deputy Prime Minister spoke earlier too. A hearing finished yesterday at the High Court on a judicial review into arms exports provided lots of information that, and I'll say this politely, is far from the impression we have been given by ministers about how arms sales, and especially about how we have the most robust arms export licences in the world. One such example is that although the government last reviewed and approved arms sales to Israel on the 8th of April, it appears that this did not consider the killing of 3 British aid workers in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza on the 1st of April. I think we all find that shocking. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, can you advise how we can ensure the government is providing this House with up-to-date and accurate information, and how we can best hold the government to account over this pressing and serious matter?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order and giving me notice of it. I think you will be interested to know that ministers were giving evidence to the Business and Trade Committee on this subject earlier today. And in view of that, I am sure he will find a way to ask ministers about any new information which may have come to light since they last answered questions on this subject in the Chamber. And I should also say that the Secretary of State for Defence has stayed to listen to his point of order, and I'm sure that the Treasury bench will feed back the points that he's made. Thank you. There are no other points of order. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require local authorities to maintain a register of heritage public houses in their area and to make provision in connection with the compilation and maintenance of such registers, to make provision relating to planning applications in respect of public houses on such a register, to place restrictions on the sale of heritage public houses, to make provision relating to the nomination of heritage public houses as assets of community value, and to make provision that the listing of heritage public houses and for connected purposes.
The question is that the honourable member... You've got 10 minutes.
Continue. Right, OK. Madam Deputy Speaker.
That was short.
Yes, no, I know. Yeah. I stand before you today with a call to action. On the 5th of August last year, we learned of the devastating loss of a cherished piece of my local community's history, the Crooked House. This beloved pub, with its unique character and rich tapestry of stories, was senselessly destroyed in what was seen by most as the ruthless pursuit of profit over preservation. The Crooked House wasn't just a pub. Over centuries, it was a gathering place, a sanctuary, a piece of our shared heritage. Its walls held countless memories and countless moments that defined our lives in the Black Country and far beyond. Built in 1765, the Crooked House saw the birth of the Industrial Revolution and tribulations of a people who worked our coal mines, our limestone mines, who worked in our foundries making nails, or the chains and anchors of the ships that sailed the 7 seas. These were a long-suffering people who just got on with the job, while their living and working conditions were truly appalling. So seeing the Crooked House violently reduced to ashes and rubble immediately tore a profound wound that cut deep into the consciousness of a people, not just locally, but nationally, and in fact, from all corners of the planet. But the destruction of the Crooked House is not just a tragedy, it's a wake-up call. It exposes a disturbing trend where short-sighted greed trumps the preservation of our cultural heritage. It vividly exposes the shortcomings of our systems and frameworks that should offer better protection to these treasured assets. Anybody who might push back at this assertion should perhaps explain why it is that across the country, historic pubs, the hub of many local communities, are under threat from the same forces that claimed the Crooked House. That's why I'm here today. I'm here to say enough is enough. It's time to put people and history before money. It's time we enshrine the protection of our heritage pubs in law to give them the best chance of surviving the forces of greed, but also the winds of change. Imagine a future, Madam Deputy Speaker, where every historic pub is safeguarded, where people cannot act with impunity, and where our communities can thrive around these cherished institutions. It's a future we can create, but only if we act soon. We need improved legislation that empowers, but also compels local councils to better protect our heritage pubs. Legislation that makes it financially unviable for those who destroy our history, legislation that enshrines the rights of communities to have a say in the future of their local pubs in a meaningful way, and legislation that will give these pubs the best chance to survive as businesses. In preparing this bill, it is important that I acknowledge the advice and support I received by many. Mr. Greg Mulholland, a former member of this place who leads the campaign for pubs. The Right Honourable Member for Kenilworth and Southam for his incisive advice and the support given by so many local people under the umbrella of the campaign to rebuild the Crooked House. Some of them are in the gallery today. There are three key elements to the proposed legislation. The first examines the role of local government, the second, how temporary restrictions on the sale of heritage pubs could give them a fighting chance, and thirdly, how the process for the purchase of assets of community value can be assisted by this legislation. The first step would empower and compel local government to create and maintain a register of heritage pubs. This would trigger assessments for possible listing. It would highlight their local importance and ensure that local planners have immediate visibility of any impending activity on site at point of sale. The Crooked House had no protections whatsoever, and an immediate application for listing had no chance of succeeding while events unfolded very quickly. So the current voluntary schemes are obviously inadequate and cannot keep pace with those who will act out greed and with impunity. In Wales, under Section 24 of the Historic Environment Act 2016, buildings are automatically given statutory protection whilst Welsh ministers make listing decisions. These protections apply until Welsh ministers have made their decision. This is an example of something that could apply in England. The second element would involve placing temporary restrictions on the sale of a heritage pub. This is not something that I would normally advocate. Meddling with property rights goes against all my instincts. But if an asset with heritage and local community value is to have a chance of surviving against the changing purchasing habits of customers and against the cold, hard decisions made by brewery accountants, then I have concluded that restricting the sale of these pubs temporarily for a 12-month period to pub trade-only buyers and at a price independently agreed by trade specialists seems like a reasonable step to take to give these beleaguered buildings a fighting chance. At the end of the 12-month period, should a sale not be agreed, then the pub would return onto the open free market for sale. But this mechanism could give a local landlord with lower operating costs and overheads compared to those of a brewery the opportunity to make a success of the pub at a purchase price that is not competing with residential development buyers. Finally, I will address the process for assets of community value. This is a good scheme that works well for certain assets, maybe a local community hall. But can it work with the speed required when owners and buyers can move very quickly? And can the scheme handle the more complex nature of an asset that could still host a struggling going concern? Well, the Crooked House proved that the ACV scheme could not have coped. The ACVs could well have a place if a local community became aware and mobilised during the 12-month restriction period I referred to earlier, and an application were made at the end of this period. Part of the ACV process requires local communities to raise funds and complete transactions within a 6-month time frame. The restriction period would effectively enhance that process by 12 months making the chances of a subsequent and successful ACV purchase much greater. Madam Deputy Speaker, the ongoing loss of our heritage pubs can represent a devastating loss to local communities. Heritage pubs can fail for multiple reasons. These are complex problems that obviously require more complex solutions. This is what I am attempting to do today. I ask you to stand with me. If we don't act now, then we will see pieces of our history eradicated forever. Stand with the ghosts of the Crooked House. Stand with my local communities in Gornal, Sedgley and Dudley and far beyond, who want to see the Crooked House rebuilt brick by brick. Stand for the future of our heritage pubs. Let us vow to protect these institutions, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come.
I will now put the question. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Leah Nietzsche, Robin Miller, Gareth Johnson, Sir Edward Lee, Sean Bailey, Steve Tuckwell, Jane Stevenson, Sir Jeremy Wright, Lee Anderson, Jim Shannon, Paulette Hamilton, and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Marco Longley.
Heritage Public Houses Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 21st of June.
Friday, 21st of June. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Renters Reform Bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now, we begin with Government New Clause 15, with which it will be convenient to debate the other selected new clauses, amendments and new schedule as listed on the selection paper. I call Minister Jacob Young to move Government New Clause 15.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move New Clause 15 and the other amendments in my name. I'm delighted to bring the Renters Reform Bill back to this House for report stage, and I'd like to express my gratitude to members across this House for their contributions to the bill during second reading and committee stage, and for their continued engagement throughout. I'd like to start by thanking my predecessors, my honourable friend, the member for Walsall North, who I had the privilege of being the PPS for as he steered the White Paper, and my honourable friend, the member for Redditch, who I had the privilege of being the whip for as she steered second reading. And I've seen this bill at every stage of its formation, and I can say to the House, the bill we are discussing today would not have been possible without their hard work and dedication. I'd also like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Woolwich and Greenwich and the Honourable Member for North Shropshire for their constructive engagement and their commitment to see this bill delivered so its benefits can be realised. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Renters Reform Bill will create a fairer private rented sector for both landlords and tenants, delivering the Government's 2019 manifesto commitment. The bill brings in the most significant reforms for the sector in over 30 years. The bill will abolish Section 21 and bring in new decency standards, giving England's 11 million tenants more certainty of secure and healthy homes. It will mean tenants will be supported to hold down jobs in their local area, children to stay in the same school, and households to put down roots in their communities. And alongside abolishing Section 21, we're also strengthening and expanding landlord possession grounds, including stronger protections against antisocial behaviour. This, combined with our reforms to ensure a modern court system, will ensure that landlords retain confidence in getting back their properties when they need to, safeguarding their investment. The new private rented sector ombudsman will resolve tenants' disputes and support landlords in handling complaints effectively. This will help avoid disagreements escalating unnecessarily to the courts, saving both landlords and tenants time and money. And our new property portal will also make landlords' responsibilities clear in one place and support tenants to make more informed choices. We're also providing stronger protections for renters with pets, recognising the joy that pets can bring. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill must strike the balance between delivering that security for tenants and fairness to landlords.
Way, the Secretary of State this morning had the brass neck to suggest that keeping his promise to outlaw no-fault evictions before the next election is now apparently down to the House of Lords to get on with it. Can the Minister tell us which is most disingenuous? Is it the 5 years we've been waiting for this government to keep their promise? Or is it the blatant concessions to the significant numbers of Conservative MPs sitting behind him who are landlords who've been gifted what amounts to an indefinite delay to ban no-fault evictions?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier on, we introduced the White Paper in 2022. We published this bill just last year in 2023, and we're bringing forward this bill today to abolish Section 21. She talks about members on my side. I can tell her, and she won't read this in the newspapers, I've been lobbied not just by members on my side, but by members from all sides of this House on making sure that these reforms work effectively. That's what the changes that we're making today at report stage do. They bring balance to the bill, delivering security for tenants, and as I've already said, fairness for landlords. These amendments ensure the new tenancy system works effectively.
The Minister for giving way, but since the government promised the outlaw Section 21 in 2019, over 2,000 people have been evicted as a result of no-fault eviction, costing the council millions of pounds to rehouse these people. So when he talks about fairness for landlords, does he realise the cost to renters, but also the local authorities in the cost of temporary accommodation?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I absolutely accept that there's a cost to that. What I'd say to her is a system that doesn't work for landlords will not benefit tenants. And a system that doesn't benefit tenants won't benefit landlords in the long run either. We have to find a balance in this bill, and that's what our amendments today deliver. As I was saying, the amendments we introduced at committee stage include expanding the range of factors a judge must consider when evicting antisocial tenants, providing stronger protections for landlords and neighbourhoods against unacceptable behaviour. We also added a new ground for possession to protect the functioning of the student market and ensure that student landlords can continue to evict in line with the academic year. Turning to housing quality, while the vast majority of landlords provide warm and decent homes, there are some who fall short of this standard. It's unacceptable for any tenant to live in damp, cold or dangerous housing. For this reason, we introduced measures at Commons Committee to apply and enforce a decent home standard to the private rented sector for the first time. This new standard, which we're designing with landlord and tenant groups, will be set out in secondary legislation. We also introduced measures to outlaw deeply unfair blanket bans on renting to those with children or those in receipt of benefits. In both England and Wales, these practices have no place in a fair and modern housing market. And of course, I give way.
Giving way. Just in terms of the decent home standard, will he give an assurance that there will be a proper energy efficiency standards contained in that decent homes standard? Otherwise, tenants will still be living in damp and cold homes because they can't afford to heat them.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can commit to working with the Chair of the Select Committee and all members of this House on making sure that the decent home standard does provide for decent homes of the kind that he describes. As I've already said, this is the first time we're applying the decent home standard to the private rented sector. We have to get this right. Finally, to target the minority of unscrupulous landlords, we gave stronger powers to local councils and strengthened rent repayment orders. This will help ensure effective and proportionate enforcement of the new system. Now, I'll turn to the government's amendments that we're introducing today at report stage. They respond to concerns from members, from constituents, and tenant and landlord groups, ensuring security for tenants whilst giving confidence to good landlords and supporting the private rented market. With that in mind, I'd like to acknowledge several members across the House who have played a direct role in helping us make sure the bill works as effectively as possible for all those who live and work in the private rented sector. That, of course, includes my honourable friend, the member for Totnes, and the honourable member for Northampton South, for their continued engagement and constructive dialogue on the measures in this bill.
Giving way, but I'm listening to him carefully. You wouldn't think from his contributions that there was any controversy at all about the position we've now got to with the government's introduction of this legislation. If everything is so wonderful, why is it that all of the key housing charities and organisations in the field have withdrawn their support for the government?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd say to the Honourable Lady, they haven't withdrawn their support. I accept their disappointment in some of the measures that we're bringing forward today, but they've also endorsed some of the amendments we're bringing forward today, including one that I know is very close to her heart around expanding the homelessness prevention duty, which has the support of organisations like Crisis, the homelessness charity, and will continue to work with everyone across the sector to make sure this bill is effective as it goes to the other place as well. But as I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to these amendments, I will address each of them thematically. Starting with our tenancy reform measures. Government New Clause 15 will ensure a tenant's notice to quit cannot expire within the first 6 months of the tenancy unless the landlord has agreed it can expire sooner. This increases the amount of time a tenant must remain in a property at the start of a tenancy from 2 to 6 months. This change ensures that landlords are able to recover the costs of replacing tenants, and it will prevent tenants from using PRS properties as short-term or holiday lets. Once the initial 6-month period of commitment has ended, the tenancy will then continue as a normal periodic tenancy. And so after the 6-month period, tenants will only need to give 2 months' notice. This ensures tenants will still retain the flexibility to end tenancies when their circumstances change or a landlord doesn't fulfil their responsibilities. This strikes the right balance of providing landlords with confidence that they need to operate within the PRS while ensuring a fairer, simpler tenancy system. In addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's exploring potential exemptions to this, such as the death of a tenant or domestic abuse or significant hazards within the property. And today I met with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance to reaffirm our intention on the exemption and make clear that victims of domestic violence will be better protected by these reforms. Government Amendments 239 and 240, which I've just mentioned to the Honourable Lady, will give tenants certainty that homelessness prevention duty will be owed when a valid Section 8 notice is served. And I'd like to pay particular tribute to the Honourable Member for Harrow East for his contributions on this, ensuring his landmark Homelessness Reduction Act continues to be effective. The prevention duty will apply where the date specified in the notice is within 56 days and the duty may not be ended simply because the 56 days has passed. This will mean that households can continue to receive support while the threat of homelessness remains. Mindful that this will broaden the scope of the prevention duty, we'll carry out a new burdens assessment and will provide funding for local authorities for any additional costs. Alongside expanding the homelessness prevention duty, I'd like to take this opportunity to restate our position on another important issue. The Statutory Homelessness Code of Guidance, which local authorities must have regard to, states that authorities should not consider it reasonable for a homeless applicant to remain in the property until a court issues a bailiff warrant or writ to enforce a possession order. We've heard anecdotal evidence that some local authorities are encouraging tenants on a blanket basis to remain in a property until the bailiffs are at the door. That is wrong. Doing so creates further delays in possession, penalises landlords who have a legal right to their property, and can be stressful and in the long run, not beneficial at all to the tenant. The guidance is clear on the importance of early prevention. Authorities should contact landlords at an early stage to understand the circumstances of an eviction and establish what steps can be taken to prevent homelessness. Government is also working to ensure that families can move out of temporary accommodation and into stable accommodation, as well as reducing the need for temporary accommodation by preventing homelessness before it occurs in the first place. That's why the government is investing over £1.2 billion in the homelessness prevention grant over the next 3 years, including £109 million top-up for the homelessness prevention grant for 24-25. This is part of an unprecedented £2.4 billion to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping. It's expected, furthermore, the £1.2 billion local housing fund enables councils in England to obtain better quality temporary accommodation for those owed homelessness duty, providing a lasting, affordable asset. It's expected to provide around 7,000 homes by 2026 to ease local homelessness pressures, reducing spending on unsuitable B&B accommodation and provide safe, sustainable housing for local communities. Government Amendments 64 to 75 extend the restriction on reletting and marketing a property following the use of the moving in and selling grounds to cover licences to occupy as well as tenancies. This will mean that landlords and people acting on their behalf, like letting agents, will be prohibited from letting or marketing a property as a short-term or holiday let following the use of these grounds. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, as well as the member for North Shropshire, who raised this in committee. This change closes a loophole in the no reletting period and helps ensure that the balance between long-term and shorter-term lets remains stable. I'll now turn to government amendments to the possession grounds, starting with the student market. And I know this is an issue close to my honourable friend, the member for Loughborough's heart. As I said, at Commons Committee, the government introduced a new ground for evicting full-time students to maintain the yearly churn of student housing. However, since introducing that ground, we've heard concerns that the ground would not apply when students are living in smaller properties or in houses of multiple occupation on individual contracts. Government Amendments 226 to 228 expand the circumstances in which the student ground can be used. Landlords will be able to ensure that properties rented to students, whether they're living individually, in pairs or in larger shared housing, will be vacated in the summer as long as all of the tenants on the tenancy agreement are students. To protect tenants, we've strengthened the requirement for landlords to provide notice to the tenant at the outset of the tenancy that the ground may be used to evict them. Possession will not be possible using this ground unless written notice has been given by the landlord at the beginning of the tenancy. Turning to Government Amendment 158, this will extend Ground 1B to allow social landlords to re-let their property to a different tenant on rent-to-buy terms, protecting the supply of these properties. This ground will only be available after the sitting tenant's discounted rent period has ended and they have been offered the chance to purchase the property. And I'd like to thank the National Housing Federation for raising this issue. Government Amendments 175 and 184 insert a new possession ground, Ground 5H, into Schedule 2 of the Housing Act 1988. This will allow private registered providers of social housing and charities to continue to operate schemes, sometimes known as stepping stone accommodation. We're keen to support these schemes, which help those who've struggled to access the private rented sector, and I'm grateful to Centrepoint, as well as the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, for drawing this to my attention and for all that he's doing to support organisations like these. Government Amendments 198 and 199 and New Clause 29 serve to replicate an existing mechanism that allows landlords of qualifying agricultural workers to provide assured short-hold tenancies rather than more secure assured agricultural occupancies. This amendment was the main ask of the Countryland and Business Association and is vital to maintain the supply of homes for rural workers by protecting the status quo. It will ensure that opted-out agricultural occupancies under the old system will continue to be opted out when they transition to the new tenancy system. Leaseholders have raised the issue that many leaseholder agreements restrict subletting on assured short-hold and fixed-term tenancies. Amendments, including Government Amendments 160 to 164 and New Clause 13, will address this ask by ensuring that subleases made under these agreements can continue unabated under the new tenancy system, and new agreements can be made if they were previously permitted. We've drafted these provisions very carefully to ensure that superior landlords and leaseholders have corresponding rights and responsibilities as they did under the previous system. Turning to Government Amendments, New Clauses 18 to 24, these extend the provisions to outlaw blanket bans on letting to tenants in receipt of benefits or with children to Scotland in consultation with the Scottish Government. They do so in a broadly similar way to those in England and Wales, with adjustments to align with the Scottish enforcement framework, demonstrating a cross-nation commitment to tackling discrimination in the private rented sector. Now to part 2 of the bill. We've made technical amendments to our redress clauses, including ensuring that the PRS Landlord Ombudsman can cooperate with other dispute resolution services. These will ensure the Ombudsman operates effectively. Now, while no final decision on the Ombudsman provider has been made, our amendments would also allow the Housing Ombudsman Service to effectively administer private landlord redress alongside social redress. A key driver in having a single ombudsman to resolve private landlord-tenant disputes is to make the service simple to use. And I want to reiterate to members that the government is absolutely committed to minimising costs and streamlining new requirements for landlords. Our ambition is for fees for the PRS Landlord Ombudsman to be low cost and value for money for landlords, similar to that of the Housing Ombudsman, where membership for social landlords, where membership costs for social landlords were just £5.75 per unit in the year 23-24. I'd also like to reaffirm our commitment to aligning the Ombudsman and Property Portal, with the ambition being that landlords will only need to input their details once to be compliant with both services. Turning to enforcement of the new system, we introduced measures at committee stage to ensure all landlords involved in criminal rent-to-rent arrangements can be held to account, including superior landlords, where they're aware of illegal activity. Government New Clause 32 ensures that superior landlords are liable for the Housing Act 2004 offences of failing to hold the correct licence for a property. And Government New Clause 33 seeks to ensure that both landlords and superior landlords can, where appropriate, be served with improvement notices requiring the removal of hazards. These changes close loopholes, ensuring local councils can continue to hold the correct landlord to account for ensuring their properties are safe and well managed. But clearly it's important that superior landlords who could not have reasonably known that the property was being let as a house of multiple occupation are protected against being penalised for the failure to licence. Government New Clause 32 provides additional defences to make sure that is the case. Indeed, as is already the case, the criminal standard of proof would need to be met for any landlord to be convicted of or subject to a fine or rent repayment order for such an offence. And finally, I'll talk through the measures we are adding to the bill to make sure it is effectively implemented. And again, I'd like to acknowledge the contributions of other members given voice by my honourable friend, the member for Totnes, so that these reforms deliver for all and avoid unintended consequences. We've been clear that Section 21 will be abolished when we're confident that the county court system is ready, and we're taking significant steps to ensure this. We've already invested £1.2 million for the Courts and Tribunal Service to deliver a new end-to-end online possession process. The government accepts that we need to assess the operation of the county court possession process as we deliver our tenancy reforms. An efficient court system is critical to ensuring confidence in the new tenancy system. Government New Clause 30 therefore requires the Lord Chancellor to prepare an assessment of the operation of possession proceedings for rented properties and for this to be published before Section 21 can be abolished for existing tenancies.
If the government are putting all this money in and doing all this planning, why can he still not give us a date as to when this is actually going to happen?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, as I have just said, we've always been clear that we will abolish Section 21 when we're confident the county court system is ready. I can't give him a date today because I can't say it until we're confident that the county court system is ready. But as I've already said, we're investing £1.2 million for the Courts and Tribunal Service to deliver this new processes. And I think it's important that the Honourable Gentleman recognises that a court system, if we don't have a ready court system, when we make this change, the biggest change in 30 years, if the courts aren't ready for these changes, that will not benefit tenants. It won't benefit landlords, but it certainly won't benefit tenants either. Now, Government Amendment New Clause 30.
So I welcome the amendment in New Clause 30 because the reality is the county courts are already under very great pressure indeed. But carrying out the assessment will of itself bring a cost. And of course, Ministry of Justice budgets are themselves already strained. What steps are going to be taken to pick up the cost and to support the Ministry of Justice and Lord Chancellor in the costs of carrying out that important assessment?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and he is absolutely right. We've committed to doing this assessment, and therefore we will ensure that the relevant funding is in place. As I've already said, we've already invested £1.2 million for the Courts and Tribunal Service to deliver a new end-to-end online possession process. But I'm pleased to also confirm today to my honourable friend that we're investing a further £11 million this financial year to deliver a new digital system as well.
In the past, have tried to blame the Select Committee for this delay by saying that we noted there was a problem in the courts and the courts would need to be ready to deal with the extra work caused by the abolition of Section 21. But the government's had 5 years to actually sort the courts out and get them working properly. Surely this has been planned for right from the last election. And I'll just point out, in terms of the Select Committee asking for improvements in the court, the Select Committee asked for a specialist housing court, a bit like a small claims court that could have processed things more quickly. We didn't ask for it last year in our report, we asked for it in 2018, and the government rejected it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I think I've been quite clear that it is important that we see the courts ready for these reforms. The honourable member for Finchley is on the front bench here with me, the Minister for the courts, and I know that he and the MOJ are working at pace to ensure that the courts are ready for the reforms that we're introducing. He asked about a specialist housing court, and we don't believe that this is the best way to improve the court process for possession, a view shared by the judiciary who responded to our call for evidence.
On this point, the chair of the Select Committee quite rightly points out that he said that this should happen 5 years ago. I would just gently say, though, that in those 5 years we have had the coronavirus, and that has been the main thing slowing down the process of improving the courts. And again, I strongly encourage the Minister not to be rushed into doing this prematurely, because it will not benefit tenants and it will not benefit landlords either.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't think it will surprise you to learn that I entirely agree with my honourable friend, and I thank him for making those points. As I said, Government New Clause 30 will enable the Government to assess the effect that our new tenancy system is having on the county courts before our reforms are rolled out more widely, giving us confidence that the sector is ready. And I'm also happy to share with colleagues that we're exploring whether serious eviction cases, such as antisocial behaviour, can be prioritised in court listings as we consult on options following royal, and we will consult on options following royal assent. Turning to Government New Clause 35, this requires the Government to...
Can I thank you? Just on New Clause 30, I recently met with Rent Start, which is a homelessness organisation with a great track record of working with landlords and getting the homeless into rented accommodation. They're slightly concerned about the changes in the sense that they may undermine their relationship with landlords, which they use to facilitate finding homes for many vulnerable constituents or other people that have come into the constituency. Just in relation to the assessment that New Clause 30 will bring about, what reassurance can he give those organisations?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I would say that the assessment is purely there to determine the timeliness of possession proceedings. But I think in addition we also have to acknowledge that there are other barriers to possession as well, such as the role of local authorities and the role of the bailiffs in that process as well. And I hope that that's what the assessment is able to draw out. When it comes to Rent Start in his constituency, I don't believe our reforms will affect the relationship that they have with landlords, but I'm more than happy to meet with him and Rent Start to understand their concerns more clearly and see if there's anything we can do to address that. Turning to Government New Clause 35, this requires the Government to arrange for a review of the new tenancy system, in particular the impact of removing fixed terms and the operation of grounds for possession. This review will be carried out by an independent person who will produce a report of their findings. The amendment requires the Government to lay the report before Parliament within 18 months of the earliest date that the new tenancy system is applied to existing tenancies. We recognise that removing fixed terms is a significant change for the sector, and this review will explicitly consider the impact of this change. It will also consider how comprehensive and fair the reformed grounds for possession are, as well as the extent to which they're operating effectively, so that all parties can have confidence in them. As I've said, the new tenancy system is a huge change for the sector, the biggest in 30 years, and it's right that we commit in legislation to reviewing its impact and its implementation and consider if changes are needed, based on real-world evidence. This will ensure the system works as well as possible for all parties for the long term.
I thank him for giving way. I mentioned several times during the debate, and the honourable member for Kensington is here because we had a very useful meeting with her, that there is a necessity to also amend the Protection from Eviction Act 1977 at the same time, because the danger is that sort of frustrated road landlords will refer back to that law and that legislation, which is very badly understood and not well enforced by police and local authorities. Can he perhaps just mention a few things about that, if he can at all?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm more than happy to address those points before the end of the debate, but I think I wrote to the Honourable Lady on these points, and if not, I'll make sure that I have, to be clear, in respect of the amendment that she's tabled. Government New Clause 36 places a duty on the Secretary of State to produce and lay an annual report before Parliament on the stock of residential tenancies in the private rented sector. This will need to be provided in the 5 years after the bill gets royal assent. Reports under this duty will cover, but not limited to, an analysis of the number, location and size of private rented sector properties. This amendment ensures that regular analysis of such information is available for scrutiny and debate. I'm also aware that several members have raised concerns relating to the interaction between the property portal and the role of selective licensing. The two systems have separate, distinct purposes. The portal will gather data on the private rented sector, ownership and property standards in England. It will provide an information source for local authorities to have oversight of the whole private rented sector in their area. It will help landlords understand their legal obligations and will give tenants the information that they need to make informed choices. Selective licensing provides local housing authorities with the powers to license privately rented properties within a designated area to address specific local issues, including poor housing conditions, high levels of antisocial behaviour or crime. Whilst there will be overlap with data gathered for the portal, information required for licences in these areas will be specific to the issue being tackled and will support more intensive enforcement action in areas that need it most. We do not want to see selective licensing abolished, but we do want to ensure that our reforms are streamlined and that burdens are minimised for landlords and local authorities. That's why I'm committing to a review of selective licensing and licensing of houses of multiple occupation, to consider how we can reduce burdens and make the system more effective for landlords, tenants and local authorities. And I'm keen to work closely with members and the wider sector on this, and will provide further details in due course. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have sat on many bill committees in this House. I was privileged to lead my first bill committee facing the honourable gentleman opposite, who's been a great person to work with and has sought at every opportunity to make sure this bill works and is effective. And as I said to him in committee, we would listen to how we can improve this bill, and we are doing so today. For tenants, we're expanding the homelessness prevention ground and closing loopholes in the system. For landlords, we're introducing an initial 6-month tenancy and giving them certainty that our reforms will work. This bill delivers on our manifesto commitments, it gives tenants security and landlords fairness. Our amendments continue in that balance, and I commend them to the House.
Notices to quit by tenants under assured tenancies. Timing.
The question is that new clause 15 be read a second time. Before I call the Shadow Minister, I just want to remind colleagues that if they wish to intervene on a speech, it is important that they've been there at the beginning of the speech, just in case the important point that they wish to raise has already been addressed, and that they stay for the duration of that speech in case others then refer to the important point that they have raised. just to clarify that, because we may have a longer speech from the Shadow Minister and people may wish to intervene. So I thought it's helpful to remind colleagues of the rules on that. Shadow Minister Matthew Pennington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise on behalf of the opposition to speak to the new clauses and amendments in my name. It is a pleasure to finally be back in the chamber to conclude the remaining stages of this important piece of legislation. I say finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, because, as you all know, the bill left committee on the 28th of November last year, almost 5 months ago. Indeed, such has been the delay in bringing it back to the House that in the intervening 147 days, the Department even managed to complete the entire common stages of another piece of housing legislation, albeit a distinctly limited and unambitious one in the form of the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill. The reason for the delay is, of course, an open secret. With the ongoing resistance to the legislation from scores of honourable members on the government benches, including many with relevant interests, as private renters across the country have certainly noted, and the undignified wrangling between them and ministers splashed across the papers for months. The damage that has been caused as a result of the discord on the government benches is significant. Not only have thousands of additional private renters been put at risk of homelessness as a result of being served a Section 21 notice in the months the bill's remaining stages have been delayed, but the sector as a whole has been left in limbo, not knowing whether or not the bill will proceed at all, and if so, in what form. Indeed, such has been the frustration at the impact on landlords and tenants of the endless rumour, speculation, and off-the-record briefings that have taken place that two organisations, as different in their outlook as Crisis and the National Residential Landlord Association, felt compelled to come together to issue a joint statement pleading with the government to bring the destabilising and damaging lack of progress and uncertainty to an end. Well, it has now finally been brought to an end, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not with ministers summoning the courage to face down their unruly backbenchers, as they could have, with the votes of these benches if required, but as is par for the course with this weak and divided Conservative government, with a series of concessions designed to placate those backbenchers at the expense of private renters, who will see a number of the rights and protections initially provided for by the bill watered down. The very fact that the government are now suggesting that the bill requires further significant amendment is ironic, Madam Deputy Speaker, given that the argument that the Parliamentary Under Secretary repeatedly drew on in committee, as he resisted 81 Labour amendments, was that as originally drafted, the bill struck precisely the right balance between the interests of landlords and those of tenants. And yet he's been put in the undignified position today of having to come to the dispatch box to ask the House to accept in good faith that conversations with Conservative backbenchers in the wake of committee stage have convinced the government, in all sincerity, that more amendments are now essential to ensure that balance is kept. It is, frankly, laughable, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the reality of the grubby political horse trading that has taken place within the government is entirely transparent. The truth is that the only balance the government have ever sought to strike when it comes to this bill is between attempting to honour the letter of the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto commitment and appeasing the vested interests pressing for the very minimum amount of reform required to assert that it has been met. Before I turn to the detail of the amendments before us, let me briefly set out Labour's position on the bill as we consider its remaining stages. With the government having promised private renters it would scrap Section 21 no-fault evictions over 5 years ago, we maintain that this legislation is shamefully overdue. Given that any further delay would cause yet more harm, both to private tenants who are desperately in need of greater rights and protections, and to responsible landlords who above all else require certainty, we believe that as imperfect as it is essential that the bill completes its passage today. Because it still contains, despite our best efforts in committee, numerous defects, deficiencies, omissions and loopholes that would allow the minority of disreputable landlords to exploit tenants and jeopardise their security of tenure, we remain firmly of the view that the bill is not yet fit for purpose and that it must be strengthened to the benefit of renters. As a result of the fact that the government appear determined to do the opposite and further tilt the playing field toward the landlord interest, we're determined not only to continue to press for those changes that we argued for in committee, but also to oppose those government amendments that are detrimental to the interests of private tenants and that jeopardise the integrity of the bill as introduced and risk fatally undermining it as a result. With the former objective in mind, I turn first to the amendments and new clauses we have tabled for consideration this afternoon. Nearly all are identical to the ones we pressed in committee, and they aim, among other things, to increase the minimum notice period in respect of de facto no-fault possession grounds from 2 to 4 months, to remove the punitive and draconian new ground 8A relating to repeated rent arrears, to better protect renters against unreasonable within-tenancy rent increases, to allow the tribunal to make rent repayment orders for additional specific breaches, to prohibit rental bidding wars, to extend Awab's law to the private rented sector, and to maintain the existing Ground 14 definition of antisocial behaviour, rather than the government's expansive new definition of being, quote, capable of causing annoyance or nuisance. And I commend each of them to the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, of particular importance to us is the need to ensure that Section 21 evictions are definitively abolished at the point the bill becomes law. As drafted, the legislation provides for a two-stage commencement process for the introduction of the new tenancy regime, with precise dates for new and existing tenancies to transition determined by the Secretary of State. We made clear in committee that we believe this two-stage transition process is the right approach, given that it would clearly not be sensible to enact the whole of Chapter 1 of Part 1 of the bill immediately at Royal Assent. However, we argue that landlords and tenants should be given certainty about precisely when the government's manifesto commitment to abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions will be enacted. In resisting our efforts in committee to amend the bill so that Section 21 is repealed on the day the Act is formally approved, the Minister argued, as the government have consistently done since announcing the concession in their response of the 20th of October 2023 to the Select Committee, that it would be wrong to do so until the courts are ready. The problem is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government has never been able to clearly articulate precisely what ready in that context means. Indeed, after weeks of debate in committee, what ministers believe the necessary court improvements encompass and what criteria will be used to determine whether sufficient progress has been achieved remains entirely ambiguous. Honourable members may recall that the background briefing note that accompanied the King's speech suggested that required improvements relate only to the court possession action process. In contrast, the government's response to the Select Committee last year outlined a far more expansive list of, quote, target areas for improvement that included many elements of the wider package of court reforms alluded to in the White Paper. We had hoped that the Minister might bring some clarity to the matter at committee stage, yet in response to forensic questioning from honourable members about exactly how the government believes the county court system is underperforming, what is the precise nature of the improvements that it believes are required before Section 21 is completely abolished, and how progress on delivering those improvements will be measured, the honourable gentleman unfortunately offered little more than vague comments about ongoing digitisation, action to tackle bailiff delays and end-to-end processes. As a result, as we contemplate sending this bill to the other place today, not only do renters still have no idea when the new tenancy system will come into force, but they remain entirely in the dark on what might constitute the requisite progress in respect of court reform that ministers have deemed necessary before it does. In our view, such a degree of uncertainty is simply unacceptable. The end of no-fault evictions cannot be made dependent on an unspecified degree of future progress in respect of court improvements subjectively determined by ministers. And let's be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will give way.
He's making an interesting point about uncertainty, and I understand where he's coming from, and there are many of us on this side who'd very much like to see Section 21 implemented as soon as possible. But does he accept that there is the other uncertainty, which is if there is a court system which isn't working adequately, the effect on the amount of private housing stock that is available for many of our constituents who need it badly could easily shrink fast, as indeed I believe has happened in Scotland, and that would be a much greater risk than not laying out at this stage the precise date at which Section 21 will be fully implemented.
I'd say two things to the honourable gentleman, and it's a valid point. Firstly, the government have had 5 years since they first made the commitment to abolish Section 21 to get the courts fit for purpose, and they haven't done so. Indeed, the timescales for both possession and litigation have remained essentially unchanged since 2019, so no progress in those 5 years. The actual process of possession proceedings is also probably one of the more efficient aspects of the county court system. And we heard extensive evidence in committee about the fact that the system is essentially working fairly well, recovering well from COVID, and that these changes would not be significant enough to delay the implementation. But even if that were the case, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is, let's have clarity about precisely what those improvements the government thinks are necessary are. Let's have metrics, let's have timelines, and then we can have an open and transparent conversation about precisely what ready means. At the moment, we are entirely in the dark. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we will remain in the dark because even if Government New Clause 30 were to be incorporated into the bill, because that amendment would merely require the Lord Chancellor to publish an assessment of the operation of the County Court possession order process in England and its enforcement before the extended application date could be set for Chapter 1 of Part 1 of the bill. There's no timescale in which that required assessment needs to be published. There's nothing that specifies the metrics the Lord Chancellor would judge the readiness of the court system against. There are no corresponding obligations imposed on the Secretary of State. So if a future Lord Chancellor assesses that funding or other specific measures are required to make the courts ready for the new system, there's nothing to compel the government of the day to implement them. And even if a future Lord Chancellor were to assess that the courts were more than ready, it remains for the Secretary of State to determine whether they wish to make the relevant commencement order, even if Clause 116 is amended by Government New Clauses 27 and 28. In short, I will give way.
Like my honourable friend, I understand where the honourable gentleman is coming from, and I don't have a problem with the abolition of Section 21, no fault evictions. But as a South East London MP, he will know the reality is that the county courts face enormous pressure, particularly in our part of the world. And I hope, before honourable members criticise the government too much, they'll perhaps talk to their own local county courts, because we are in a situation where the data is suggesting that on average you could be looking at about 55 weeks for commencement of a possession claim till the decision is made, and on top of that you have enforcement. Now that's not acceptable. I want it to be quicker, but we do need therefore to accept, as the Association of District Judges have said, and those are the data which the Justice Select Committee has got the most accurate, I have to say to people, that we have to be realistic about the situation we're in. Because the District Judges Association points out that there has been underfunding of the county court for many years, and frankly, under governments of both parties, because I can remember when I was in practice, when the Honourable Gentleman's government was in party, and there was underfunding of the county courts then as well. We all have to take our share of responsibility for that, rather than making it a matter of party controversy.
Right, honourable gentleman, for that point. We all want the processes to be quicker. I don't think that's in dispute at all. And they certainly could be made quicker. Landlords need robust grounds for possessions in legitimate circumstances, and they need the system to be able to operate quickly when they do. The question for us today is, should we essentially put the abolition of Section 21 on hold until we have reassurance about an undefined amount of improvement that we don't know when that is going to be delivered? I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. It is, all I've heard is about the importance of ensuring that the courts are functioning quick enough to enable landlords to evict the tenants they want. But currently, renters only have a month, just over a month before they are evicted. I had a constituent who had lost his son in the most horrific of circumstances, and he was in the local papers. The family was served Section 21 notice, whilst the landlord knew the family had lost their child. But they said they had to serve it because they had a month still. They needed to get them. So where is the protection for the renters? And does he agree with me that the kicking of the Section 21 notice abolition that into the grass means they really don't care about renters at all?
Well, I think my honourable friend is right to highlight the impact on renters. And that's essentially what we're debating here. Every month that passes, more private renters are served Section 21 notices. Nearly 85,000 of them have been put at risk of homelessness as a result of being served one of those notices, as the government has delayed the implementation of its commitment. And as the bill is drafted, even as I said with Government New Clause 30, we have a situation where the Minister can determine whenever they want to signal to the House that the courts are ready. We've got no assurances on that point, and we don't think that is satisfactory. And Government New Clause 30 in particular, Madam Deputy Speaker, in our view, is nothing more than a mechanism designed to facilitate the further delay of the complete abolition of Section 21 evictions, and we will look to vote against it. It's clear that there will be a requirement of 6 months advance notice before new tenancies are converted, and a minimum of 12 months between that conversion and the transition of existing tenancies, with the proposal today that the latter also be made subject to the assessment required by Government New Clause 30. It could well be years, Madam Deputy Speaker, before renters see Section 21 completely abolished, making a complete mockery of the Secretary of State's recent claim that such notices will be, and I quote, outlawed by the next general election. And we know the government are in no rush to abolish Section 21 evictions because they're not laying the groundwork that is necessary for that to happen. Where are the draft prescribed forms for Section 8 notices? Where are the proposed amended court forms and civil procedure rules? There's no sign of them, Madam Deputy Speaker, or any sense of what the regulations required to bring them forward might be. Because the truth is that ministers determined long ago, for reasons that are entirely obvious, to essentially kick the can down the road on Section 21 while disingenuously denying they are doing so, taking the passage of this bill as a signal that they've been abolished. Well, private renters outside of this chamber will know they have not been abolished by the point of the next election, and that the implementation has been pushed back potentially indefinitely. We believe that hard-pressed renters have waited long enough for the commitment made by the Conservatives over 5 years ago to be delivered. They require certainty that it will truly be honoured and Section 21 evictions definitively abolished with the passing of this legislation. Our Amendment 28 would provide that certainty by ensuring that Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988 is repealed on the day that the bill receives royal assent, with saving provisions for any notices served before that date, so they remain valid and of lawful effect. I commend it to the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, Government New Clauses 27, 28 and 30, to which I've made reference, are of course only 3 of the 225 government amendments that were tabled just before the deadline last week. Before concluding, I want to touch briefly on several of the more substantive among them, starting with the small number that would be genuine improvements to the bill. We're pleased that the Government has responded to our calls to ensure the maintenance of a number of the regulatory obligations which have built up around Section 21 notices over the years, by tabling Government New Clause 14, that gives the Secretary of State the power by regulation to transpose those preconditions and requirements into Section 8 eviction notices. Similarly, we're pleased that the Government have listened to the argument made by my honourable friend, the member for Weaver Vale in committee, and through Government Amendment 239 will amend the bill to ensure that tenants maintain the right to access homelessness support when served with a valid Section 8 notice. Sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, these and other sensible Government amendments to the bill, including new clauses 32 and 34, are overshadowed by others that are far more concerning. Chief among them is Government New Clause 15. As the Minister has explained in his remarks, this amendment would prevent renters from serving a notice to quit within the first 4 months of a tenancy. Coupled with the 2-month notice period provided for by the bill as introduced, it would mean that tenants would be unable to leave a property until they had resided in it for at least 6 months, unless the landlord agrees otherwise. The Government have committed to considering exemptions to this fixed initial 6-month letting period in serious circumstances such as domestic abuse, the death of a tenant, or if a serious hazard is present in the property. But there's nothing in the Government amendment as drafted to guarantee that any such exemptions will ultimately be made or what they would look like in practice. And even if such exemptions were introduced, we believe the proposed 6-month initial period would still be extremely damaging. Not only would placing the onus on tenants to prove that they qualify for an exemption under serious circumstances deter many, particularly those experiencing domestic abuse, from exploring such an option, but a fixed initial period of any kind risks fatally undermining the integrity of the new tenancy regime itself. Premised as it is, Madam Deputy Speaker, on all future assured tenancies being periodic and open-ended, with tenants able to end their tenancy when they see fit with appropriate notice as provided for by the bill. Now, the Government have advanced 2 arguments in justifying the 11th hour introduction of their new Clause 15. First, that it will ensure that the costs borne by landlords of finding tenants and making repairs between tenancies are covered. Second, that it would prevent tenants using rented properties as short-term lets. Yet all the available evidence suggests that the prohibitive costs of moving are leading tenants as a whole to stay longer in their homes, and there is no evidence whatsoever to support the entirely hypothetical notion that tenants en masse are likely to game the new tenancy regime in order to use rental properties as short-term lets. The truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no compelling rationale for Government New Clause 15, and as the Minister knows full well, if the Government were not having to appease a small minority in their own ranks, they would not be proposing it. We believe that the proposed 6-month initial period will not only trap large numbers of tenants in unsafe and unsuitable properties, but that it puts at risk the coherence of the tenancy regime that is at the heart of the bill, and we will look to vote against it. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a long overdue piece of legislation, and it is imperative. There's no question that it needs to progress today. But for those of us on these benches, the bill as introduced was only ever a starting point for overhauling the regulation of the private rented sector. As it progressed, it should have been enhanced so that the playing field between landlord and tenant was levelled decisively. Instead, the fractious state of the Conservative Party has seen the government make concession after concession in an attempt, and it is a fruitless attempt from what we can see, to placate a minority of honourable members on the government benches. We need to draw a line today on what that minority is able to extract from ministers to the detriment of private renters who deserve better, and strengthen the bill in a number of important respects. And I urge the House to come together to do so.
Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are many amendments on which I could speak. Indeed, the book of amendments seems to be almost as long, if not longer, than the bill itself. But I'm going to limit myself to the new clause 12, which I have put forward in my name and those of honourable friends and colleagues, on which amendments 44, 45, 46 and 47 are contingent. Essentially, Madam Deputy Speaker, the purpose of this amendment, and I should first of all declare an interest in the Register as Chair of a Safeguarding and Quality Board for a children's company, because that goes to the heart of my interest, because this deals with care-experienced children. Essentially, the purpose of this amendment is to ensure that landlords do not discriminate against people who've grown up in the care system when making the decision on who to rent the property to, and it would place a specific duty on them, preventing them from denying those who've grown up in the care system a tenancy on that basis. And landlords who are found to be in breach of the newly inserted clause could be subject to penalties. That's the thrust of what I'm trying to achieve, and I think that may strike a chord with many colleagues here. And some may remember a recent case which really highlighted the potential problem there is here, where the Guinness Housing Trust, in advertising a property for rent, specifically said that it was not available to care leavers. That was an extraordinary piece of discrimination, redolent of the bad old days where people put up signs saying no dogs, no Irish and no blacks, if we can remember back that far. And here there was a potential discrimination against young people who, through no fault of their own, happened to have been through the care system. Guinness fortunately withdrew that straight away and apologised, but it did reinforce the vulnerabilities that there are for some of the most vulnerable young people in our society when trying to get onto the basic of daily requirements, a roof over their heads. So that's what's behind this amendment today. And I want to thank a coalition of various charities and organisations who have done a lot of the heavy lifting on this, led by Bernardo's and the charity for care-experienced young people, Become, as well as others. Now, let me say at the outset, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is a probing amendment, and I'm grateful for the positive engagement that I've had from the Minister already, and I'm wholly optimistic he's going to say some helpful and constructive things when he comes to respond. So I just really want to flesh out why I think this is an important amendment in this important bill, where there are many other priorities as well, I fully admit. So I have, as you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, a very long-standing care and interest in championing care-experienced young people, formerly as Children's Minister, and I currently chair the All-Party Group for Children and Vice Chair of the All-Party Group for Children in Care. So why do we need to do more to support care leavers when accessing accommodation in the private rented sector? And I think it's imperative, first of all, for us to consider the bigger picture in terms of the issues faced by our young people leaving care especially. There are over 85,000 children and young people currently in the care system in England. It's a recent high, and every year over 12,000 of them leave that care system. And we all know, unfortunately, despite all the best efforts and endeavours of successive governments and ministers, that care leavers still have much poorer outcomes than their peers. They're less likely to gain good qualifications in the education system. Nearly half of children in the care system have a mental health problem, and it's estimated that a quarter of homeless people have been in care at some point in their lives, and they're also disproportionately represented in the justice system, and over a quarter of serving prisoners. So from the age of 18, care-experienced young people are often expected to be financially independent and manage their own household bills. But research over many decades has shown that care leavers are much more financially vulnerable than their peers, and a significant number live on or near the poverty line and struggle to make ends meet. And we all know, unfortunately, despite all the... While I'm being echoed, Madam Deputy Speaker, while inflation is now beginning to, as if you can't get enough of me once, you're now getting it in stereo with a time delay. Whilst inflation is now beginning to come down, there are certain sectors that continue to see large price increases, which of course includes the private rented sector. Private rental prices paid by tenants in the UK rose by some 6.2% in the 12 months to January of this year, unchanged for the second consecutive month. And that puts a huge pressure on all tenants. But for young care leavers living independently at the age of just 18, they have no support from the bank of mum and dad. And for them, things can be especially tough. I will, of course.
I thank the man for giving way, and he's making a very important and very excellent point about